There's only one place you can hear Jonathan Mosen, and that's right here, the home of the fun guys. This is Mushroom FM.
We are back with another live edition of Mosen at Large in just a moment, and at 5 o'clock we cut way over to Canada for another edition of the Early Years with Steve Cutway. That, of course, is Eastern Time. At 7 o'clock, Dan Sweeney's in with another edition of One Hit Wonders from this weekend, 1958 to 1988. The Snowman is live at 8 with Snow White FM, and Gary's here at 11.
Mushroom FM.
Music, personality, and fun times on MushroomFM.com.
How do I act? What do I do? What do I say?
Mushroom FM.
Welcome, it's Jonathan Mosen. This is Mosen at Large, the show that's got the blind community talking to celebrate the arrival of Small World on Mushroom Escape. We're sharing childhood radio memories today. What do you hope Microsoft will deliver in Windows 11? And we'll discuss jolly old sleep strategies.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
As ever, it's great to have you along, no matter how you are listening to us. It could be on Clubhouse, it could be on YouTube, Facebook, the jolly old Mushroom FM. If you would like to be in touch, you can do that by dropping me an email. Jonathan@mushroomfm.com is how you do that. That email could contain an audio attachment, or you may just prefer to write it down. Jonathan@mushroomfm.com. You can also call our listener line if you prefer to do that. 864-60-MOSEN is that number. That is, of course, in the United States, so be mindful of that if you are calling internationally. 864-606-6736. And you can also get in touch via various social channels. If you are listening on YouTube or Facebook, there's a chat box there. You can complete that. You can also tweet with the Mushroom FM hashtag. And when you use that, you might like to track the hashtag in case there are responses from other listeners. It's a great way to have a discussion while the show rolls on. Tweet with the Mushroom FM hashtag. Thank you for joining us for another episode. It's wonderful to have you along. And thanks to the intricacies of time zones, it is Sunday in New Zealand as I put this together, which means that today is the day. But if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, then as I put this together, it's still Saturday, which means that tomorrow is the day. The day for what? The day that I've been looking forward to for many, many months now, and that is when we launch the new version of Small World. That is the kids program for the whole family. It dates back to 1977 in New Zealand and ran for about 29 years on and off on various radio stations, became such a popular fixture. And to have been given the honour of being asked to resurrect it is just something I never thought that I would have the chance to do. So all a bit exciting, a little bit nerve-wracking, and that happens on Mushroom Escape. The first episode will air for the first time at midnight, North American Eastern Time, on Sunday the 20th, and then it plays every 4 hours throughout the day. So 12, 4, and 8, both AM and PM, on Sunday the 20th. And if you are not in North American Eastern Time and you don't know what that equates to in your time zone, you can go to the Mushroom Escape schedule page, mushroomfm.com/escape, and it will display in your local time zone. And I hope that you enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed getting ready to do this for you. I think I will enjoy it once it's on and out there, you know. Right now it's like pre-show nerve time. Anyway, all of this stuff talking about Small World and bringing up many radio memories for me made me think that it's time we went on a good old reminiscing session. We do this from time to time, and we had a great run of discussion not so long ago when we talked about tape recorder technology that we used to use, and that got some great memories going. And it's good for those of us who've been around a while now, but it's also good for younger people who might want to know about earlier times and what things were like. And for many blind people, radio has played a big part in our lives, hasn't it? Sighted people, of course, love radio too. The vast majority of broadcasters are sighted. But I think blind people have a higher love of radio among our population than sighted people because it's a medium we can fully consume and appreciate. And certainly, radio played a big part in my life. I started going into the radio station when I was about 4 years old, which is a crazy story. And if you want to hear all about that, you can hear that in the series that tells my life story that Glenn Gordon did called In the Arena, the Jonathan Mosen story. It's available as a podcast if you search for In the Arena, and it's also available on mosen.org. And it's scary to think that in just 2 or 3 years or 3 years' time, no, 2 years' time now, see, time's going fast, I will be celebrating 50 years on the radio, which is just scary. But anyway, I won't revisit too many of the memories that we covered on In the Arena, because you can hear that if you want to. But I would like to just talk about radio and the role that it played in my childhood as a listener. I was really fortunate to be growing up in a New Zealand where a lot was happening in radio. So I started to listen to radio in the mid-1970s. Our radio history was quite similar to Britain, but it did have some key differences. We did have privately owned radio stations in New Zealand until 1936. In late 1935, a left-of-centre Labour government was elected in New Zealand for the first time, and they decided to nationalise all the radio stations. They did something a bit differently from the way the BBC did it, in that they had a commercial and a non-commercial arm. It was called various things over the years: the New Zealand Broadcasting Service, the New Zealand Broadcasting Corporation, and later Radio New Zealand, but it was a government entity running everything. In 1966, inspired by the offshore radio stations in Britain, which were seeking to break their government monopoly, Radio Hauraki started, which was broadcasting from the Hauraki Gulf in the Auckland area, and I've produced documentaries on that subject. It's something I really love to study and listen to air checks of. When I eventually worked in radio, I got to work with quite a few of those guys who would tell their Radio Hauraki stories, and I loved listening to them. But the big difference between what happened in Britain and what happened in New Zealand is that Britain closed all those radio stations down with the Marine Offences Act in 1967. Well, most of them. Radio Caroline kept going on and off. And they set up a youth channel run by the government entity, the BBC. So private radio didn't come to Britain for quite some years after, until 1973. In New Zealand, Radio Hauraki won their argument and won their battle. So a new framework was established for private radio in New Zealand, and Radio Hauraki won a license to broadcast, and there was another radio station in Auckland that started around about the same time, just after Radio Hauraki, called Radio I, which is the one that I spent a lot of time on in the 70s. And eventually, private radio started making its way around the country. Now, the NZBC, later Radio New Zealand, started lifting their game in response, and there was not a lot of networked radio on those commercial stations in the early days when I was listening. So that meant there were a lot of radio stations to listen to. And I know, having talked to people about radio in the United States, where they have a lot of radio stations, the same was also true. Maybe less so, I'm not sure, where you could tune around the dial and really get different things. Whereas today, it might not be so easy to get different products because so much is networked anyway. And this was all on AM. We didn't have our first full-time legal FM radio station in New Zealand until 1983. That's how much of a backwater we were back then, a very regulated backwater. So this was all happening on AM. And another big difference of that time was that there was much less interference. These days there's so much electronic equipment, so much computer equipment, that makes it difficult to do long-distance listening on AM radio. But the biggest problem I remember having was the TV, and I used to really look forward to Mum and Dad going to bed, and then the TV would get switched off, and the reception would clear up considerably, and you could listen to different programs from all around New Zealand, but you could also get the Australian radio stations, and even stations from Fiji. On a particularly good day, you could even get a station from American Samoa. And all of this overseas listening was aided by the fact that until 1980, at midnight, the commercial radio stations would close down. At least the government-owned ones. The private ones would go 24/7, but there weren't that many of those. All the government commercial stations would faithfully shut down at midnight, and they would switch off their transmitters. So the band was completely clear. And if you were a blind person with non-24, like me, you could then listen to radio from Australia really easily. I remember listening to 2BL in Sydney, to 4QR in Brisbane, a lot of Sydney stations, 2CH, 2SM, 3AW I think we used to get. There were a lot of stations that would just come booming in after midnight when the AM band was clear. So it was a treasure trove of things to listen to. Jingles and ads and magic things, and of course with the long distance stuff I used to listen to, it would all come through the static, and somehow that would make it a little bit more magical, knowing that it was coming from so far away. And I didn't have any specially amazing equipment, just like a Sanyo transistor radio, I think, and at one point a Panasonic transistor radio. I don't recall us ever using an external antenna to bring these signals in. We did have a telescopic antenna, but I don't know what difference that made on the AM band, if any. But the stations came pouring in anyway. The other interesting feature of New Zealand radio in the 1970s and 80s, and I was actually later part of a few of these, was that you used to be able to apply to the Broadcasting Tribunal, which was the authority in New Zealand that granted radio licenses, to operate short-term radio stations for specific purposes. And there was ample capacity on the band then, even in Auckland, New Zealand's largest city, that these temporary radio stations would pop up. There were usually special frequencies allocated to the temporary stations. 603, way down the bottom of the dial, was one. 1404 was another one, and that was the one that I used for my temporary radio station at the School for the Blind. And you would look on these frequencies, and you'd hear a carrier there that wasn't there yesterday, or a test tone, or music playing, and you'd think, oh, I wonder what this is. And they would use the temporary radio station system in New Zealand for all sorts of interesting things. Sometimes it was for Māori Language Week. The university didn't have a full-time radio station at that stage, so they might come on for Orientation Week, and then they might come back for Capping Week. I remember that the Seventh-day Adventists used to run a radio station that popped up over the summer from time to time. All sorts of really interesting ideas. We have these rural field days that go on at a place called Mystery Creek in Hamilton, and they would have a temporary radio station actually broadcasting from there so that the farmers knew what was going on and what to visit. They used to call it Radio with Boots On, I remember. And that would broadcast on 855 kilohertz from Hamilton. And the radio geek in me loved listening to the testing. Just how did a radio station come to be? And if you've listened to me launching some of the internet radio initiatives I've been a part of over the years, you'll know I love a good radio launch. I really do. And that's where my love of that comes from, is listening to these stations, testing and starting. And of course, if you've got a permanent radio station testing and starting, that was really huge and exciting. And I remember with a lot of fondness the start of the FM radio stations in 1983. Before those FM radio stations started, we got pirates on FM, and these were land-based pirates who were trying to beat the radio inspectors. They would switch off and relocate and switch back on again. And as kids, we loved those FM pirates, the pristine sound, the kind of illegality of it, you know, the being on the edge, and it was just amazing. You'd tune into the FM band, scan around. We had a lot of taxis on it in those days. I think they cleared 88 to 94 megahertz initially for potential broadcast at some future point, and that's where you'd go and tune. But the rest of it was full of taxis and radio telephones and things. They eventually cleared the band, obviously, so that the full band could be used for FM broadcasts. So that was what New Zealand was like. Listening with the transistor radio, sometimes with a little earphone in your ear, sometimes under the pillow. And I haven't even got onto the shortwave stuff, but that was what we would do to listen to domestic radio. And I do remember one night in the 1980s when the government-owned commercial radio stations had gone 24/7. And one night, a whole bunch of them went off. There was some weird thing that went wrong with their automated programming, of the transmitters, and at about 5 minutes past 12, the local one I was listening to went off. That would have been 1ZB, and I thought, it's not supposed to be off. And then when I tuned around, they were all gone. And so I actually made a phone call to Wellington, where the networked thing by then was broadcasting from, and I said, do you realise that a whole lot of your stations are off the air? And, I'm just a kid calling, and they didn't believe me. And they said, oh, you must have something wrong with your radio. And I said, I can confirm that this problem is on 1ZB in Auckland, and 1ZH in Hamilton, and 1ZO in Tokoroa, and 1ZU in Taumaranui, and I gave them this big list of call letters and frequencies where it's not happening, and I said, so you see, I have actually checked very carefully. And they said, oh, you really do know what you're talking about. And so they eventually got it fixed. But that's the radio nerd that I was. And I suspect, anyway, like many blind people, I used to often call the broadcasters, especially on the commercial radio stations where at night time and in the weekends, they would probably be the only person in the building, perhaps a newsreader. But they'd be sitting there, they'd be playing their own music. So this wasn't a talk show. They never put me to air. Well, very seldom anyway, not in this format. I would just call to say hello to them and talk about radio and stuff like that. And they'd chat to me between records, and then they'd say, hang on, Jonathan, and they'd put me on hold and do their voice break and come back and keep chatting. And I got to talk to a lot of broadcasters that way, and I suspect a lot of us did that. So those are just a few of my radio memories. It's a fun thing to talk about, and I've been thinking about it a lot, especially since we are about to relaunch, resurrect this iconic Small World show that's meant so much to so many New Zealanders, and also because I found a YouTube channel called The Radio Vault, which is full of New Zealand radio air checks, and it was wonderful to hear voices that I haven't heard for ages and remember names I'd forgotten about. All good stuff, remembering these things.
Hi Jonathan and Mosen at Largers, it's Peter from Robin Hood County. When I was a child, it was a radio under the pillow when I was at school, and I used to have a discreet earpiece, and I would listen to stations sometimes late into the night. Used to love medium wave, where some of the stations would mix together and you try and imagine where all these foreign countries were. Most of the stations in our country improved a lot during the 60s when pirate radio came. Radio London, Caroline, 390, Radio Veronica, those kind of things. And whilst the Americans had some very good radio shows in the 40s and 50s, I think in merry old England here it was our turn in the 60s, with great luminaries like John Peel, Kenny Everett, Jack Jackson, Alan Fluff Freeman, to name but a few. I used to like all their shows. Even in the 80s we had a couple of good DJs. I had a friend who worked at Radio Trent, who's no longer with us now, called John Shaw, and he was always playing alternative music. During late nights in the 60s, around 1967 to 69, I used to listen to a guy called John Curl, and he used to have a lot of alternative music. You'd hear stuff like Captain Beefheart, Dean Friedman, Kevin Coyne, those kind of people. Frank Zappa even. Musicians that may not be popular for some of you. I used to have to listen to American Forces Network when I could pick it up, so I could get my dose of Bessie Smith, Lazy Lester and Son House, because I was a great lover of blues, and also King Oliver. Fantastic jazz musician King Oliver was. If you've not heard King Oliver, you've not lived. You can tap your feet to most of his stuff. That was in the 20s. In the early 60s, in the daytime, radio in our country was a bit iffy, but we had some good comedy programmes such as Clitheroe Kid, Round the Horn, Hancock's Half Hour, and Beyond Our Ken, and even things like Ken Dodd, and a great genius in the 70s, Les Dawson. And some of those shows are repeated now on BBC Radio 4 Extra, which you can get through BBC Sounds should you live abroad. Some of the American programmes I used to listen to when I could get them were mostly on vinyl because I couldn't pick up the stations, but I would listen to the Bickersons, the Whistler, Johnny Dollar, there was another one for you, those kind of programmes. But I have long, fond memories of radio, and I'm afraid today's radio is very, very sanitised, and you have to pick and choose the sort of music you want to listen to. So for speech now, it's Radio 4 Extra, Radio 5 Live for my sport. And for music, it's BBC 6 Music for most part, because I do like my rock music. Being an old dude now, I'm a 70-year-old dude now. I just don't have the long hair anymore. It'd look a bit silly, wouldn't it? A bloke with white hair and a ponytail.
You're only as young as you feel, Pete. So many wonderful memories I could comment on there, but the first thing I would say is that I hope you might add both Mushroom FM and Mushroom Escape to your repertoire of listening pleasures, because we have a show on Mushroom FM you would love. It's called Duke in the Back. It's hosted from an inn in Massachusetts by a guy called Matt the Cat, and this is all rhythm and blues before rock and roll. And it's wonderful. Man, am I getting an education by listening to Matt the Cat. So do check out when it's on in your time zone on the Mushroom FM schedule page. If you like your blues, you will love the Duke in the Back show that we play on Mushroom FM. Also over on Mushroom Escape, we are playing a number of those British and American shows. We got a lot of those British shows on our public broadcaster here, and they repeated on many occasions, but I remember with a lot of fondness the Clitheroe Kid, Hancock's Half Hour, Round the Horn. Gosh, Rambling Sid Rumpole and Julian and Sandy were my favourite bits on Round the Horn. Steptoe and Son, Dad's Army, The Men from the Ministry, The Navy Lark, all of that. Wonderful, but of course the pinnacle of them all was the Goon Show. And it's amazing to me, in Australia and New Zealand and Britain certainly, there is a real inculcation of the goons into blindness culture, especially if you're of a certain age. The goons are wonderful, and I still enjoy dipping into my extensive Goon Show collection, and we play the goons on Mushroom Escape as well. As for Radio London and Kenny Everett, it is my somewhat bold and contentious view that Kenny Everett is the best broadcaster who has ever walked this great earth. And I also think that Radio London was the best commercial radio station I have ever heard air checks of. Because what they did was they got the formula from Cliff in Dallas, and they were funded by the Texas millionaire dude who was involved in running Cliff. And they took that formula and they turned it into something that English people would listen to. So it's got that English class about it, but it's got the pace, it's got the Pam's jingles. Radio London was just fantastic. Radio London was it. And I always thought Tony Blackburn was a very smart man for jumping ship, and almost literally, and going from Radio Caroline to Radio London. Wow, what a great station that was.
Hello, Jonathan. It's Grace here. The radio programmes I used to love listening to included Jimmy Clitheroe, the Clitheroe Kid. I liked that. I liked Round the Horn. I liked Beyond Their Ken. And I liked, believe it or not, Mrs. Dale's Diary. I remember my mum used to listen to that. And also there was a serial called Wagoner's Walk. So that brings back a lot of memories too. Sometimes, when we were at school, in the dormitory at night, we used to listen to the plays on the radio. And used to get good ones, like Saturday Night Theatre.
That's another one that you can hear on Mushroom Escape these days. Thank you, Grace. And this is another area where the US and the UK really diverged dramatically in the 1960s, because a lot of radio drama disappeared from the American airwaves but the BBC still do great radio drama. And it's well produced, well mixed, sounds fantastic. Maribel is writing in with an Australian perspective, but it's on British radio. She says that radio played a significant role in my life during 1978 in particular. In that year, I was sent to the UK from Australia to undergo a health treatment for my eyes. It was quite a rigorous treatment, so to escape the torment of it all, I turned to the radio. Capital Radio 104 played the Kenny Everett Show every Saturday morning. It was so hilarious and silly. I would record the shows onto a cassette tape. Remember that ancient technology, she says, and re-listen over and over again to help me cope with the treatment. I still have a couple of those cassettes to this day. Please give a shout out to my friend Roger in Kendall, who I met at the time, and he is a keen Mosen and radio fan too. Oh, well, that's nice. Thank you, Maribel. You know what? I would love it if you could digitize those Kenny Everett cassettes for me. I am a collector of Kenny Everett air checks. I've got a lot of them. And as I say, I think Kenny Everett was the best broadcaster to have ever walked this great earth. I'm not surprised that he helped you through a difficult time. He was an absolute genius.
Hi Jonathan, I wanted to give you my memories of radio here in New Zealand, and in particular from my childhood. You will well remember Merv Smith as the host of the breakfast show here on what was in those days 1ZB. And in the mornings on the breakfast show, he had a character called McKerry, which was a spider that lived up in the archives and bits and pieces in the studio. And McKerry would come down and talk to Merv and have a bit of banter with Merv every morning before the 8 a.m. news. Now, when I started going to Homai the Blind School, the bus that used to arrive to pick me up as a day pupil used to come just before 8 a.m. And it was always around the time when McKerry was on. And we got frustrated with this because there was not only myself and my brother being picked up at my house, but 3 other kids. So there was 5 of us. And we said, we're not coming out to the bus until we've finished listening to McKerry. And in those days, our school bus driver was Ross Mackenzie, one of the teachers out there at Homai. And he was a bit of a character too. And he figured, oh, well, I'm not going to win this fight. So he offloaded all the kids on the bus into my mum's kitchen. And in those days, our big radio cassette player that Dad proudly acquired from a friend who went to Norfolk Island sat on top of the refrigerator. And so all the kids would gather in Mum's kitchen around the fridge and listen to Merv Smith and McKerry. And then once he was finished and the 8 o'clock news came on, we'd all pile out back on the school bus and off we'd go to school. So I had the reputation for holding up the school bus. Now, Merv Smith also became very heavily involved in other areas within the blind community. I well remember him probably being one of the first audio describers of the Santa Parade for us kids. And in Merv's typical naughty style, would get a little bit naughty and a little bit rude sometimes with his descriptions of some of the characters and some of the things in the parade, which made it really fun for us kids. But also he was a great narrator of a lot of books in our talking book library here in New Zealand, and several times over won the Narrator of the Year. Because of all of his efforts over the years, Blind Citizens New Zealand, Auckland branch, had the privilege of giving Merv, 12 months before he died, the Blind Bit of Difference Award. Him and his wife came to our Christmas function here in Auckland, and I was given the privilege of presenting that award to him and telling him the story about how I was responsible for making the bus from West Auckland almost be late to school every morning, which he thoroughly enjoyed. So I just thought I would share. That's one of my very, very special memories about early radio in New Zealand. I thought I would leave it to you to talk about how you were on radio before you even started school.
Oh, yes, I tell you, the public have put up with a lot, haven't they? Thank you so much for those memories, Carolyn. Merv Smith was a wonderful broadcaster, and not just a broadcaster. As you say, he narrated talking books, he voiced many brilliant commercials, he even read children's stories on commercial audiobooks in New Zealand, and I know that some of his Harry Potter readings have made it international thanks to the Marrakesh Treaty. So he's gone global with some of his talking books. And McHarry was a very much looked forward to and loved feature for adults and kids alike just before the 8 o'clock news. He used to ring the school bell, and then he'd sometimes read birthday messages for kids and all kinds of things. McHarry lived in the air conditioning duct at Broadcasting House and would come down, and when he did, Merv would go as McHarry, the Scottish spider, arrived. Interestingly, he did that show, the breakfast show, on 1ZB until 1ZB changed to a news talk format in 1987. He did that show for 25 years, and he was surplus to requirements as a result of their change of format, but he was very much sought after and quickly snapped up a job on Radio I, actually, where Small World started. And by 1987, people were quite corporate in New Zealand, and Radio New Zealand said to Merv, you can't use McHarry on Radio I. We've decided that McHarry is a trademark of Radio New Zealand, so he had to invent another spider when he went to Radio I, and they called that spider Paddy Longlegs, and that was fun too. So Paddy Longlegs had a Scottish accent instead of an Irish one. I have to say, when I went into commercial radio full-time, Merv was incredibly supportive of me, always encouraging, and he came out to our radio station that we ran at the School for the Blind and did a great couple of shows there. You mentioned the description of the Christmas parades that used to be held in conjunction with Farmers, the big department store in Hobson Street in Auckland, and we used to go there in the 70s at least. It probably went into the 80s. And now that I think about it, that was an incredibly progressive idea for its time. So essentially what happened is they would put the blind kids in this special place on the rooftop of Farmers, and they would have a radio personality of the day, people like Merv Smith, giving audio description of the parade. How really cool was that, now that I think about it? They used to take us to a party afterwards as well, where we would get all sorts of special toys for Christmas.
Hi, Jonathan. Two things to talk about. First, about the radio. My first memory of a radio station was in my mum and dad's house. There was an old programme on their big radiogram, or it was a big radio they had anyway, and it was called The McFlannels. And it was on a Saturday night on BBC Radio Scotland. It was about the Scottish family, and it must have been away in the early 50s. And then I remember listening to the Scottish dance music on a Saturday night. I also remember later on listening to The Archers when I must have been about 8 or 9, although I didn't follow it, but I remember hearing it at school. And I remember listening to the Jimmy Clitheroe, the Clitheroe Kid. And when we were in our bed, when we were ill at school and we had to be in our bed, I remember listening to BBC Schools, Singing Together, that's it, Singing Together. And then there was a Keep Fit one as well, and there was a science programme as well. And I remember listening to Housewife's Choice, Music While You Work. I remember actually once or twice pretending to be ill at school so that I could hear the BBC Schools programmes. I remember that, and I remember we would all be in the dormitory listening to the Saturday night play, and there would be a play on a Monday night as well, and they would both last for an hour and a half. And we would all be listening to the same play, but all had our same radios. Number 2, this is what I want to talk about. I am really annoyed because I sent review to the app developer of Global Player, and I see there's 1 or 2 blind people have done the same, and I wrote this way back in April, and I just got a response yesterday saying, and they said to the other blind people as well, perhaps if you speak to our customer services they can talk you through how to work it. We could talk you through it. And I thought, they haven't got a clue. They're saying the app's we're saying the app is inaccessible, and then they're turning around and saying if you contact us, we can talk you through it. How can they? They wouldn't have a clue. Oh, that has annoyed me. So do you know what? Well, watch this space. I'm getting very good at advocacy because STV have already told them that they don't have audio description on the app, and I'm annoyed that the ITV Hub has got it and the BBC iPlayer has got it, and they keep fobbing you off and saying, yeah, we'll hope to do it by the end of the year. And I got in touch with RNIB Scotland, but they put me in touch with the English RNIB. I would have thought it would be an RNIB Scotland thing, but I've never heard back from the RNIB because I thought they would maybe help as well to put my case. But, they don't seem bothered at all.
That's May Thompson getting in touch. Thank you, May. First, on your radio comments, I'm very proud of the fact that over the years that I've been doing various internet radio things, and that is about 22 and a half years now, I have encouraged many Americans to listen to The Archers because The Archers are still going. This is a BBC radio drama that started in 1951, and it's still going, and in fact, one of the characters is played by an actress who was 102 years old. She turned 102 on June the 14th, and she was in it when it started in 1951. And the thing you can do with a long-running series like that is develop storylines in real life. So there are issues coming to the fore now relating to the death of a major character in the 1970s who died of alcoholism, and because there's an alcoholism story running in The Archers at the moment, new information is coming to light. The whole current alcoholism story that they are running has taken years to come to a crescendo. That's what you can do when you know you've got a drama that's just going to run and run. You can get The Archers in podcast form as well, actually in 2 podcast forms. You can get the weekly episode known as the Omnibus, where they stitch all the episodes together, or you can get the episodes as they're released. Normally, there are 6 episodes of The Archers every week, and they run about 13 minutes. But because of the pandemic, they've taken production down to 4, but they hope to ramp it up to the full 6 again soon. And many of us cannot wait for that to happen. It's been a long year. They even went through a phase where during the pandemic they did these kind of monologues where you got to see into the heads of some of the characters. Pretty hard going, I have to say, but they're back on track now. We used to get The Archers in New Zealand, and on the commercial radio station, one of the ones we've been talking about here actually, 1ZB, I can remember my mum having The Archers on, and it would come on just after 3 in the afternoon, I believe, and The Archers would be on in that familiar signature theme, and then the Omnibus would be on the non-commercial station, what we called the national program in those days, on a Thursday night. And The Archers are actually responsible for my first formal advocacy, because in 1982, the BBC Transcription Service decided that they were going to put up the price of sending The Archers to New Zealand. And Radio New Zealand said, we're not going to pay this. So they announced that The Archers' run on Radio New Zealand was going to finish. And I was devastated, as were actually quite a lot of blind people. So I wrote to the Minister of Broadcasting. Now, in retrospect, I know that the Minister of Broadcasting does not have any control over operational matters, over what they choose to put on the radio, and he wrote back and told me that. But I got out the typewriter, and I learned how to write a letter to Parliament, and I wrote it very respectfully and talked about how much The Archers meant to us, and sent it off. And I got a reply from the Minister of Broadcasting, and that was quite an exciting moment in our lives, because in my family we didn't usually get letters in the post from a government minister, but I was able to keep up with the Archers, and now it's on the internet. And then May segued, of course, into comments about modern ways that we listen to radio through apps like the Global Player. And Global Media is a company that looks after a lot of the independent radio stations in the United Kingdom, and there are accessibility problems with that. I believe you have a Sonos device, May, and you can add Global to Sonos, and it's accessible there. But you don't always want to listen on Sonos. You might be out and about, so I'm not in any way saying that that is a satisfactory workaround, but it might help you in certain situations. But fight the good fight. You've got to advocate for these things. I don't know what legislative protections you might have in the United Kingdom. I don't know whether Global might be breaking any laws by not making their app accessible, or whether ITV might be breaking any laws by not including audio description on their app. But good on you for advocating, because if you don't, nothing will change. So keep us posted if you make progress.
Jonathan Mosen, Mosen at Large Podcast.
This email says, "Hello, Jonathan. This is Ross Winetsky writing to you from a small rural city where I live in New Mexico in the United States. I am 74 years old and have been totally blind for 20 years. I believe I recall your saying you have non-24 sleep-wake disorder. Although I have not yet been clinically diagnosed, I believe I also have that disorder. I have not slept well for many years, and recently it has worsened. Over the past few years, my anxiety and depression have worsened, and I now believe that those feelings were exacerbated by non-24. I think I was in some denial because I have known about this disorder, however would not accept that I had it. About 4 days ago, my anxiety and depression was so high that I knew I had to do something. I started researching non-24, and it really fit for me. For quite a while, there have been periods where I slept fairly well. However, more frequently, I would be exhausted, fall into bed to a deep sleep, only to wake up in 2 hours or so feeling wide awake. I would read or listen to podcasts, Mosen at Large, of course, he says, while dozing for a few hours and then waking again. I have scheduled an appointment with my sleep doctor, but cannot get in to see her for about 3 weeks from now. Without any real knowledge of how to do this, I am now experimenting with melatonin. I started with 1 milligram for 2 nights, slept fabulously, and then had another night which was not as good. Tonight I am going to try 0.5 milligrams to see how that works. In the past, when I took melatonin, I remember having some really bad nightmares. I am hoping that will not happen. I would really appreciate if you could share some of your knowledge and experiences of non-24. I have so many questions in my mind, such as, how will this affect my social life? Will it progress? Will I always be tired? Will I be able to go to concerts again, providing the pandemic will allow for concerts? I realize non-24 shows up with different symptoms for different people. Nonetheless, I would appreciate you sharing some of your experiences and knowledge. Thank you in advance for any thoughts you might be able to share. Thank you very much, Ross. I'm sorry this is getting you down to the extent that it is. It can be a real problem. And obviously I'm not qualified to give medical advice, but I am qualified to tell you what I have experienced myself and what I've learned from research. The first thing I would say is that you might like to search for and subscribe to the Blind Side podcast, which is the podcast that I ran between about 2016 and 2019, I think it was. And all those old episodes are still available. If you search for The Blind Side, there are several podcasts called that, but obviously the one you want is the one hosted by me. In the Blind Side archives, you will find an interview with Professor Stephen Lockley. He has spent a good chunk of his career researching non-24, particularly as it affects blind people. I first interviewed Stephen back on ACB Radio when I was doing Blindline, so I thought it's about time we got an update from him, and it was a very informative discussion that may help you a lot. The second thing I would say is that at age 74, you may or may not be experiencing non-24, but typically as you get older, it can be harder to maintain sleep, and for whatever reason, people as they get older find that they are sleeping less, so that could be a contributing factor in your situation as well. I definitely have non-24. I've experienced it at different times in my life. I'm totally blind, have been since birth, and as a child, it used to affect me really badly. I can remember listening to lots of great radio, midnight to dawn radio. There was actually some good stuff back then to listen to on the radio, just not being able to sleep. And then, of course, I would have to go to school. I remember sometimes I would doze off with my head on my Perkins brailler. One day the teacher asked me a question while I had my head on my Perkins brailler dozed off, and I didn't answer. And she walked over with a ruler and whacked the ruler on the desk right beside me. Boy, did I jump a mile. I mean, hopefully these days there's more understanding of what non-24 is and how it might affect children. My parents used to tell the story of my older brother, who's 15 years older than me and also blind, and how as a baby he used to just get on his rocking horse in the middle of the night. Nobody, of course, in the 1950s knew about non-24 and what was going on. And so it was quite difficult, I think, for a lot of blind children who often were castigated, berated for sleeping at the wrong time when it was actually nothing that they could help. And I think it can get worse as you become a teenager as well, because there's lots going on then. And I do remember one particular day when I just couldn't face going to school. I was just so tired, I couldn't face it, and I was in big trouble for that. But it's not a very well understood thing, and I'm not sure how well understood it is even now. And in that Blindside interview, Stephen Lockley does talk about how you can use him as a resource if you go to a doctor for help and the doctor is not informed about non-24 and its effects. The whole thing is caused, of course, by the fact that your circadian rhythm is not keeping a regular 24-hour cycle. So what happens is that you're okay for a while, but gradually your cycle goes off kilter from that 24-hour cycle, so you get out of phase, and this is where melatonin is supposed to help. What happens is that when the sun goes down, that sends a signal to your pineal gland to start producing melatonin. But if your body can't see, if your brain doesn't know that the sun is going down, then that signal isn't sent to produce the melatonin, and it's the melatonin that can make you drowsy. So that's the theory behind it. I take about 2.5 milligrams of melatonin. I'm not sure if that's too much or whatever. I have experienced the vivid dreams that come with melatonin. They can be quite lively, but I think I've become a little bit more used to them over the years that I've taken melatonin. I did go through quite a long period where I didn't bother to take melatonin, and I just let my cycle do what it wanted to do. And that's because I spent a very long time working for companies offshore. And those companies were pretty relaxed about when I delivered my deliverables, with the exception of meetings that I had to attend, and usually those companies were quite considerate and they'd try and make a time later in their day, which was earlier in mine. But if it turned out that I was up at 1 or 2 in the morning, then so were my colleagues, and I could get work done and just crash when I needed to crash, and that worked really well. Now, obviously, that situation changed for me significantly in 2019, when I became chief executive of a national organisation here in New Zealand, and I need to be there. I need to be alert and sprightly 9 to 5 at least. So I've been doing a lot of work on this. I do take the melatonin regularly, pretty much nightly, but I've also done a lot of reading on current sleep research. What I have found is that exercise makes a really big difference. So I was pretty good at exercising before this, but I have a routine now, and I do 30 minutes on my treadmill when I get up in the morning, and then I do strength training in the evening, and the strength training kind of perks me up enough to hopefully stay awake and stay in sync until it's bedtime. I'm not trying to suggest that I've completely cured non-24, and I'm certainly not suggesting that I have a good night's sleep every time, but I am saying that I'm sleeping better now than I ever have. And, you know, there are nights when you toss and turn, and part of it, I think, is just being in the role that I'm in. Sometimes you got worries, man. You got big worries. But I'm doing much better. And what I've found is the secret for me, apart from maintaining that exercise regimen, which really does help me, is to be really consistent. It takes a lot of discipline to do this. So because I get up at 5 in the morning, I'm in bed by about 8:30, which sounds very boring, I realize. And obviously I'll make an exception if we're going out to dinner or a concert or something, but usually I'm in bed by 8:30, and it doesn't matter what day of the week it is. My alarm goes off at 5 a.m. and I get up. And I even do that on Saturdays and Sundays. I have to do that on Sunday anyway because Mosen at Large is on live at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning, my time. The consistency has really helped me. And I think that we often think of sleeping in as this great luxury and a treat. There's nothing worse for those of us with non-24 than thinking that we're treating ourselves to a sleep in. If you can establish a ritual before bed, I like a nice hot bath. It seems to really help me. And I take my melatonin and I wind down. That really does help as well. I also put on usually a hypnosis or a sleep-based meditation and drift off to sleep with it. I really find that helpful. Now, there are times when I do wake up in the night and then I have to make a decision. I do use sometimes hypnosis and meditations then to get back to sleep. Sometimes it works, and it's working a lot more in my life now than it ever has. At other times it does not work, particularly if I have things that are occupying my brain, and as soon as I wake up I'm thinking about them. And so sometimes I still just have to accept, okay, I am unlikely to get back to sleep. If it's 3 in the morning and I'm set to wake up at 5, it's not actually that big a deal. The trick is then, though, to just make yourself stay awake until it's bedtime, and you can usually get back into sync again. So there are a lot of people who have sleep issues who don't have non-24. And so these techniques can apply to all of us. Other things that may have contributed to my improved sleep quality include what I'm eating. I'm really careful about what I eat. I'm eating a low-carb, ketogenic diet, and I definitely think that that has helped a lot. The big one is giving up alcohol. When I got into my meditation practice, I just found that alcohol interfered with that. I gave it up, and that has improved the quality of my sleep immeasurably. I will refer once again to a book that I talked about some months ago on this podcast called Breath, and it's by James Nestor, Nestor. And the whole thesis behind his book is that we are causing ourselves a lot of damage by breathing through our mouths, that whenever possible, we should breathe through our nose. And I actually find it still quite hard to do that when speaking, but I do it successfully all the time now when I'm not speaking, when I'm just working away. I'm breathing through my nose, not through my mouth anymore. And it's amazing how much better you feel doing that. And apparently there are all sorts of health benefits. He goes into some detail in his book called Breath. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this in the context of sleep is that he talks about these mouth strips, and you can buy them from Amazon. And the idea behind them is that you close your mouth when you're ready to go to sleep. You put one of these mouth strips over your mouth so it's impossible to breathe through your mouth when you're asleep. And the quality of my sleep has definitely improved in the sense that when I wake up, I feel a lot more refreshed than I did before. There is no doubt, though, that non-24 adds a horrible, difficult variable. There is a drug in the United States which we don't have access to, which is specifically designed for non-24, and it's made by Vanda Pharmaceuticals. It got a lot of publicity a few years ago, and I did hear from blind people who I respect and trust that it made a big difference to their lives. So it's possible that you may be able to access that. I also find that eating relatively early is a good idea as well. So I try to have eaten by 5:30 or 6 because I'm in bed quite early because I like to start early. You know what they say, right? Early to rise and likewise to bed makes a man healthy but socially dead. And just a couple more things. Weighted blankets. I read about weighted blankets somewhere on a tech publication of all things, and when I read about it, I thought this has got to be a fad. But I researched it, and it turns out there is some pretty good science behind this. Weighted blankets are really exactly as they sound. They are blankets that are very heavy, and what makes them heavy is usually there's a lot of tiny glass beads sealed inside the blanket. So it's a very heavy, what we would call a duvet in America. I think they call them a comforter, and it makes you feel very snugly. One of the key use cases for weighted blankets is apparently it can help people who are dealing with anxiety. And parents give kids with anxiety or some issues of that nature weighted blankets, and they say there is an appreciable difference. It can also help you stay asleep. We got a weighted blanket a couple of years ago. We absolutely love ours. It really does seem to make a difference, and the only trouble is it makes you more reluctant to get out of bed in the morning because it just feels so encompassing and nice. They're not cheap, but they may be worth it if you want to invest in the quality of your sleep. And all these things just seem to have helped. I'm really pleased with how I'm sleeping these days overall. So progress. Whether we have non-24 or whether we don't, though, getting a good night's sleep is an issue for many of us. So if you have any tips or tricks to share on this subject, then please do share them. It'll be a great discussion.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
As the old saying goes, be wary of what you hear from politicians and Microsoft officials. Well, I'm not sure if that is an old saying, but it could well be a saying that gains some credence in future because Microsoft have said for a long time now that Windows 10 will be the last version of Windows. Even if you ask Cortana, if you happen to have it, whether Windows 10 is real, it references an old answer off the web somewhere that says that Windows 10 is the last version of Windows, but that is not the case. I have deliberately not been reporting on all the Windows 11 speculation on this show because we tend to be quite careful about what we report on, and I was pretty convinced that Microsoft could be believed and that this Windows 11 thing was just a lot of hype that would amount to nothing, and that what we would end up with is a new version of Windows 10. That is clearly not the case, and we know this because there is a new build of Windows 11 that some naughty person has leaked out into the web. And I don't know anybody with accessibility creds who've installed this. If you have installed the Windows 11 build and you can report on any accessibility changes, then that would be good intel to have. But that unofficial build of Windows 11 proves categorically that it is real, it is happening. Microsoft's going to be telling us all about Windows 11 at a special event on June the 24th that is going to be streamed, and it begins at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, which means it's 3 a.m. in New Zealand. Oh my word, and oh my Excel, and oh my Outlook, and oh my PowerPoint. That's early. So we know that there's going to be a new start menu in Windows 11. We know that visually Windows 11 is going to look quite different, but we don't know too much more at this stage. And so, as I said in the announcement that I sent out to the media list, and you're on that, right? So that you know what we're talking about ahead of the show, and you can contribute ahead of the show if you want to. As I said on that list, I'm interested in finding out what you would like to see in Windows 11. I use Windows a lot. I'm sitting here every day, I'm producing audio in Windows, I'm doing a lot of my work in Windows, so it plays a big part in my life, and yet for some reason I can't get as excited about a new version of the Windows operating system as I do about iOS. And perhaps that's because I feel like iOS is evolving and adding meaningful features, and Windows just hasn't for a long time. I can't really think the last time Windows added something in one of these updates that I use every day and that has really made a difference to my life. Perhaps Windows 11 will change that. So I don't have an orderly constructed top 10 list, but I do have a few things that spring out, and the first one is I really hope that Windows 11 deals with its audio issues. Audio in Windows is so far behind Mac, it ain't even close, and that's really frustrating. One of the biggest issues that many of us have is this business where audio hibernates very quickly, which means that when you're using a screen reader, if you press a key, you miss the first few keystrokes that you press while the audio wakes up. JAWS has a feature built in that seeks to get around this by sending silence out, and there is a third-party tool that will send silence to keep the audio interface awake so you don't get this hibernation. This seems to be particularly a problem on Realtek devices, and Realtek devices are ubiquitous in Windows. I kind of feel like there's a lot of inconsistency about the user interface of Windows. When you use a Mac application, it's really consistent. You can go to the menu bar, you know that there will be a pretty consistent set of options in the menu bar, and you know that menu bars work the same way on any application. Now, the difference probably is when you're running iOS applications, I accept that, but if you're running an application built for Mac, they're pretty consistent in their menu structure. With Windows, you've got the old menu system, which I personally prefer. You've got the Microsoft ribbon, which I detest. It's not that I don't know how to use it, I just find it clunky, unwieldy, horrible. If I could go back to the user interface of Office, 2010 was the last one maybe, that had the menu bar, I would love to do that if I could keep all the features that I now have in the current Office. And I must not be the only one, and it must not be a blindness thing, because I see that Microsoft now offers a simplified ribbon in Office. So maybe a lot of people just don't like the ribbon. Can we just have a consistent menu-based interface back? And unfortunately, you've got another kind of interface, and that's when you go into an app like Microsoft Teams. That doesn't even have a menu bar. So what that all means is that Windows is a mishmash, a hodgepodge of user interfaces depending on the application you are using, and I can only imagine how difficult it is for somebody learning Windows today, starting from scratch. It's not so bad for those of us who started a long time ago and have seen this inconsistency occur incrementally, but it must be tough for people learning, trying to contend with different user interfaces depending on the application that they are using. So let's get some consistency back in Windows. Narrator is going to be an interesting one to see what's there. Are we going to get scripting in Narrator for Windows 11? If the Windows 11 Narrator does that, boy, that is going to be a bit of a game changer in the assistive technology industry. We have seen Narrator becoming increasingly capable over time. And it may be that the jump from 10 to 11 will be an excuse for the accessibility team to roll out something really spectacular with Narrator. I am now of the view that there are people who can get by just with Narrator. And it is attractive, obviously, that you can walk up to any computer, press Windows, Control-Enter, and make it talk quite well. So if they continue to build on what they've started, they've got some pretty capable people working on that screen reader now. And they add scripting so that people can be more efficient or work with difficult applications. Well, watch this space. That could be very interesting. Comments now on a range of topics that we've been talking about today from Christopher Wright, who says, I didn't grow up in the golden age of radio, but I like a few of the old shows. In particular, I enjoy Baby Snooks, X-1, and Dimension X. Love those last two, Christopher. They are fantastic sci-fi shows. He says, I have no interest in any of the other programming that was popular during that time. Well, maybe you haven't heard it all. That's a possibility. Maybe you haven't. He says, in the modern era, I didn't pay attention to the radio because it's full of crummy music and lots of advertisements for crap I never need or want. The medium itself is, however, extremely fascinating. I enjoy the modern audio dramas, including We're Alive, which is a zombie story that's not your typical zombie survival story, and the Levithian Chronicles, which focuses on a group of immortals as they try to survive. Since these are made with much better audio equipment, they sound amazing. I've thought about looking into ham radios, but I don't know what I'd talk about, and I don't have the motivation to go through the song and dance to get licensed. Internet radio has captured my imagination because it's higher quality and can be broadcast all over the world. On the other hand, I appreciate the ability to talk back and forth using nothing more than the airwaves. I used to have a police scanner that would let me listen to all sorts of broadcasts, but now that I can do it with the internet, I don't use it anymore. Based on what I've read, And see, we are getting back to Windows 11, which is why I held this message. Windows 11, if that's even the name they're using, is going to be a minor visual overhaul. Hopefully, it's a free upgrade for existing Windows users. At this point, maybe it should simply be called Windows. As for Narrator, I hope it continues to evolve. It's getting more and more viable as a daily driver, but I'd like additional capabilities to be added, including remote desktop support, a pronunciation dictionary, better Braille support that's built in, expanded verbosity settings, and more. I'm still celebrating the support for the Windows installer pre-installation environment and safe mode. There is a bug in the current version of Windows where Narrator won't work with the advanced startup option menu, but that should be fixed in 20H2 or Windows 11 if that ends up replacing it in October. Derry Lawler from Ireland writes, "Hi Jonathan, hope you're well. I do love your weekly podcast and never miss it. Since you now transmit on Clubhouse, I feel like I am actually part of the show. Windows 11. Yes, I hoped and thought that was it for Windows. Just let the features get better. I am enjoying my experience of using Windows, but not looking forward to seeing what will be broken in the next update. I do not use Narrator, only when in remote desktop when JAWS sometimes rarely stops speaking. It would be nice if there was more Braille support built in. Non-24. This year I was sent for a sleep study. This is where they attach lots of sensors to your body and record how you sleep. They found that I have sleep apnea, and I stopped breathing 25 times an hour. The consultant put me on a CPAP, which stands for Continuous Positive Airway Pressure, and is a mask on your face and keeps your airway open. I tried it for over 5 weeks and never slept. It brought me to the brink of insomnia, and sleeping tablets were suggested. I decided with the consent of the consultant that this was ridiculous, and we stopped the treatment. He then said that I was carrying too much weight, so I now do cardio exercises, and that has helped. Thank you, Derry. Good luck with getting the sleeping sorted. That is one thing that I didn't mention in the segment on sleep, which may have helped, is that I've lost a lot of weight doing keto, and that's probably assisted with my sleeping too. Back to Windows 11, and Anil has his list of requests. 1. Screen curtain. Now, there was a feature in Narrator called Developer Mode, which sort of did this, but I can't find it anymore. The command used to be Narrator and Shift and F12, but it doesn't seem to work for me anymore, and it wasn't really a full screen curtain anyway. So yes, screen curtain is his first one. Number 2, eloquence on Narrator as a default synthesizer. Yes, cue the applause. 3, say all text with sound scheme. 4, cursor wrapping feature. Coming to Windows 11, he says, it is good to have a radical user interface change. New startup sound used to be my requested feature, which seems to be addressed as per the leaked build. Now on to my COVID-19 experience, he says. I contracted COVID on the 18th of May 2021, as per my first symptoms. It started at night when I felt a little bit of a block in my left nostril with sleeplessness. The next day, I noticed fatigue, a sore throat, a headache, and a little bit of a cough. The fatigue felt like you had a long journey. The other symptoms are only noticeable if I concentrate. The fatigue lasted for 6 hours. Other symptoms for 2 to 3 more days during my last symptomatic day on the 22nd of May 2021. A headache and sore throat was prominent. Then it was all fine from the 23rd of May. I tested negative on the 31st of May. The positive thing for my COVID-19 is that I can wait for 3 months for a vaccine. Also, the expert committee recommended that the government of India stop vaccination for people who previously had COVID-19. If it finalizes, I am free from vaccination. The best thing is the COVID-19 did not have any impact on me as of now. Thank you for your email, Anil. I'm really sorry to hear that you went through that, but I'm thrilled that you seem to be through it okay, because clearly COVID-19 can be fatal. I'm glad that it was a mild dose for you and that you're doing okay. Look after yourself. Gino J is in touch and says, I'm not surprised about Windows 11 being released. I just hope that Fusion, the magnifier/reader software that includes Zoom Text and JAWS, doesn't become antiquated like Zoom Text 11 did in just 4 years. How was anyone supposed to pay $2,300 for software that helps us stay employed? The Massachusetts Commission for the Blind has been dragging their feet getting me the software, and I just hope I can get it before the end of August when I move to Ohio. As far as features in Windows 11 that I'd like to see, if they can add the same color filtering technologies, Smart Invert, they have in Zoom Text to the Windows magnifier, I may forego trying to get Fusion, as I don't really need the speech output. It was just a luxury. Thanks very much, Gino, and I feel pretty confident, not that I know, but I'm pretty confident that now that the code base has been standardized so that Fusion can go ahead with the latest Zoom Text and JAWS versions, I think that you should be in pretty good shape if you can keep your SMAs current for subsequent years. And this just in, Jeff Bishop is in touch, and he knows things, of course, because he's on the Microsoft Narrator development team, and I'm just going to make sure, I'm going to open this email because I heard it come in, and I heard what he said, but I don't want to misinform you, so just give me a sec. This is real live radio going on. And I'm just going to make sure that we get the narrator command correct for you regarding developer mode, which is kind of like the screen curtain, as I said, when Anil brought this up. So here we go, after all that waffling. Jeff says that it's narrator plus control plus F12. Maybe I said something else. Okay, narrator plus control plus F12 will get you into developer mode. So thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate that. No doubt you've got a big week coming up.
Mushroom FM.
We are very late for this top of hour sequence, but you know, I do have to point out that we are less than 9 hours away from Small World. Yeah, I know. So it seems an appropriate time to talk with Don Linden, the broadcasting icon from New Zealand and legendary entertainer who gave us Small World. So that's what's coming up this hour.
Mushroom FM.
You may not like the taste of mushrooms, but you'll love the sound of Mushroom FM.
This mushroom is magic. Mushroom FM.
Jonathan Mosen.
Oh, that's me.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
If you want to be in touch with the show, the email address to which you can send an audio attachment or write something down is jonathan@mushroomfm.com. That's JONATHAN at mushroomfm.com. You can also tweet with the Mushroom FM hashtag if you're on the Twitter, or you can type a message into the little box in Facebook and YouTube. It was a New Zealand tradition that spanned generations. On Sunday mornings, the children would be nestled, all snug in their beds, of course, listening to what was often called the children's session. Sometimes Mum and Dad would take the opportunity to enjoy a sleep-in or have a break from the kids, and at other times they'd listen in too. The same stories would keep coming up regularly because the kids liked it that way. That tradition has its origins back in a time when New Zealand's government-owned broadcaster was all there was. And then in the 1970s, after private radio had come to New Zealand, kids were given a choice on a Sunday morning. With this new show, not only were there stories and songs, but competitions and even a talk segment. The show was Small World. It soon became a beloved institution in its own right, and it too spanned the generations. Small World's host was Don Linden, and it's my great pleasure to be talking with him today. Don, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you.
Is it my turn now?
It is your turn now after all that big build-up.
Good morning, Jonathan. How are you? I must confess, I had to go back into my book of paste-ups and write-ups and all sorts to find out exactly when the program started. It was 1977.
I got it about right then. I thought it was about 76 or 77, so my memory's all right. But before we come to talk about Small World, you were a well-established entertainer before Small World came along. You obviously have a love of the medium, of entertaining. Where does that come from?
I was born for radio. In fact, when I was a child, and that's not so long ago, radios were not safe in our house because I had to find out how they worked.
Yeah. You took it apart, did you?
Well, yes, when I could, when I got the opportunity. No, I was always knew I was going to be in radio, but it was primarily the technical side. I had a real thing about how it all worked, and not only radio but television. I remember I had a lovely wind-up blue HMV gramophone, which I used to play my favourite records. Favourite record was, incidentally, You Can't Help Laughing, which was a brilliant one. Anyhow, I digress. But so I gutted this, and I put a hole in the front and a hole in the back, and I stuck it on a sort of wooden tripod, and that was my television camera. So I always knew I was going to be in radio, but I was really only production. And I mean, when I went to Set and Tech later, I took the radio course and I did a radio apprenticeship. It's in, when I say radio apprenticeship, with a company, but always fascinated by the technical side of things, tape recorders and everything.
And yet you were also acting, weren't you? I mean, you've had a career in the acting profession as well, so you've got that mix there.
Yeah, I had been entertaining for quite some time, mainly in Auckland, but also toured New Zealand, toured with Harry Miller's Showtime Spectaculars, toured with Johnny Ray, all sorts of people. I won't go into that now. And that sort of opened another door for me. It was great. And I really got a very good grounding in entertainment. I'd started where I was working at the Colony, which was the nightclub in Auckland. And that happened purely per chance. I was walking along Albert Street one day, and Armstrong Sidley pulled up. Bob Sell got out, introduced himself, and said, "Look, I've got a big wedding, Jewish wedding coming up here on Friday the such and such at the Colony, my nightclub, and I'd like to book you for that." And then the nightclub opened the following Saturday, and perhaps you can go on the floor show. And I remember saying quite clearly, yeah, that's fine, but I really don't think the act will last. Well, I did the Colony floor show for 5 years.
And tell me about that act.
Oh, it was lip sync. Well, I called it comedy mime in those days because lip sync wasn't a phrase that was really known. And basically, I lip synced to a record. It started off quite by chance. I used to love standing in front of a mirror, which is always lovely. And I would mime to things like the drinking song from the Student Prince. And my favourite was Figaro from the Barber of Seville. And a dear friend of the family who lived nearby, called Reg Morgan, very well known in musical circles in Auckland, organised a talent quest locally and suggested I enter, which I did, and subsequently won. And that led off to other talent quests. So for a while I did the round of talent quests. And you work with people like, and they were just starting, Tony Williams, Red Hewitt, a whole lot of people, you know, who were just in their starting days. And the breeding ground for a lot of that talent was a place called the Maori Community Centre. It was opposite Victoria Park, right on the corner there. It was a great place for Sunday entertainment, really good stuff there. And that was sort of the beginning. And then I went on to subsequently win with the Auckland final for the Joe Brown Search of Stars, and went down to Dunedin to appear in the final, which I did. I didn't win, but that wasn't the point. And then we also did a tour of New Zealand. So all this is it's a background, but you learn a lot of things. I mean, even just by standing and watching, you learn about staging and programming, and this added to other things I got involved in, you know.
And by day, you were doing the Bond and Bond thing, is that right? Which is a retailer.
Yeah. Although I left that, I didn't complete the apprenticeship, as I recall. I left about four years into it because entertainment just blossomed, you know, and that was it. And that was my path. I knew I was going to go down, but that gave me the initial grounding in radio and my fascination for things technical, which was a great plus because as I developed, I was also able to build my own amplifiers, which were portable and I took with me for presentation of the show. Another bonus of Bond and Bond was I was fortunate enough to be able to take home tape recorders in the weekend. And I guess that was the start of it, because with a tape recorder, I found I could record a song, and I would take perhaps a commercial, a well-known commercial. There was Mollenberg, all sorts of things, and you'd take out perhaps a short clip of 12 seconds or maybe 25 seconds if it was popular, because all these commercials were seen, and then there was really only one station, maybe two, of television, so everybody knew them. And in the middle of a song, I would just drop in a commercial, which was suddenly brought a whole lot of laughter. It became very entertaining. And that's how I built the act, with a lot of editing. And it wasn't only commercials, it was dropping in other songs and things like that. And all this because I was able to have a tape recorder at home. Eventually, I got my own tape recorder, second tape recorder, and indeed third tape recorder. And when I was editing in my little studio, I'd have bits of tape that I'd cut out stuck on the wall in case I had to put them back, because there was no such thing as digital editing. You had to physically put that little bit of tape back where you took it from.
So it sounds very similar to the kind of thing that Les Paul was doing in some ways, and also, of course, Kenny Everett, who came later, who was a genius with the tape machine and would do multi-tracks and overdubs and all kinds of crazy things.
Well, of course, Les Paul introduced multi-tracking.
Genius, wasn't he?
He was the very first. And other people had done it, but when Les Paul did it, there was no degradation of the tracks. The quality was exactly as it was exactly pure. And because often when you dub to another tape, you lose quality. Perhaps you lose the highs and things like that. Les Paul never did that. And indeed, he invented the multi-track machine. He was a genius.
Yes, absolutely remarkable. And we've been talking a lot, and we'll get to why, over the last few months. You mentioned to me at one point that we might have you to thank for the Stardusters, which is a very famous New Zealand group.
Yeah, this is the advantage of having a tape recorder at home, because the Stardusters, Jack and Bill Langford, were cousins of mine, and the third member was a chap called Laurie North, a very dear friend from Rangitoto, where we had a holiday batch, still do. And when the Langfords, Jack and Billy, had visited, they met Laurie North. So we had an afternoon tea at our place one day, and the Langfords were there with their wives, and Laurie and Doris North came along. And it was great. And it was only a matter of time before Cousin Bill picked up the guitar and started strumming, and they all started to sing. And I said, "Have you guys ever heard yourself?" They said, "No." So I said, "Come on into the bedroom." So into Mum and Dad's bedroom, and I had set the machine up there. And they made the first recording. And we did a couple of alterations. They changed their vocals, what they were doing, and just rechecked the microphone. And then we took another take. And that was the beginning of the Stardusters. I can't pinpoint the year. It's around about 55, I think. And that was because I happened to have a tape recorder at home. And resulting from that one recording, which they took away, one of them, I'm not quite certain who, it may have been Laurie North, because he was in advertising and he would have known people. But within a few months, they were signed by Noel Peach at Astor Studios in Shortland Street, who had the Tanza label, and released their first song, which was The Greatest Feeling in the World.
And did you keep the tape?
Next question.
Because you could have released it as what they call a bootleg these days.
I could have kicked myself. This is not an invitation for you, but my mother had a beautiful singing voice. She did competitions in Hamilton and that, and I've got the first, second prize certificate, all that. And she had a magnificent voice, and her Bless This House was absolutely beautiful. And it wasn't until years after she died, I thought, "Lyndon, you're a bloody idiot. Here I had a tape recorder. I recorded everything, but I never thought to record my mother." And that was one of my biggest regrets, particularly as her grandchildren had beautiful voices, and they would have loved to have heard her.
And no matter how hard we try, the voices of those who've gone just fade over the years, don't they, from your memory?
Well, fortunately, I do have other recordings of her in messages they sent to me when I was living in America, and the voice is there, you know. And I also have an old video clip when I had my first camera at home, and Mum and Dad were in the kitchen, and that's a gem now. That's a gem.
You were known affectionately as the Mouth because of this act that you had perfected. And it occurred to me, thinking about talking to you, that as a blind person, that is a very visual act. Can you describe what that was all about and what you did?
Well, it just so happened I could stretch my mouth wide open, which I used to advantage in cabaret, not in cabaret show, in shows generally, because they did them everywhere. And at the right time, on the right music and lyrics, it just works well, you know. And that's how I became known. In fact, when they had the first telethon, which was for St John's Ambulance Association, the closing shot was of me with my mouth open and the insignia of St John's Ambulance just coming right out of my mouth and filling the screen. And that was the news item for that night. Just a sideline. Some years later, I was driving a Jaguar. I don't know why, but I liked it. And I came to an intersection one day, a very well known intersection in Auckland in Custom Street, and for some reason I nudged the back of a small car in front of me. You see, oh calamity! Woman got out. I wound down the window. She walked up, and this is what she said: "You, I might have known you had a car as big as your bloody mouth."
I remember that first telethon. TV2 had just started not very long before they had a go at that telethon, and they were only on in Auckland and Christchurch.
Yeah, the first telethon was 75.
75, that's right, yeah. It was remarkable. And I don't think New Zealand had seen anything like that before.
No, they hadn't. I recall a dear friend of mine, Don Hutchings, driving me out to the airport one day because I knew he was about to launch TV2. And he said, "When I come back, I will probably have a nice little job for you." And I thought, oh, yeah. And he never said any more. The job that he was talking about was I was going to be one of the people on the first telethon.
That was a remarkable thing about media then. You could bring a nation together with an event like that.
You could. That first and second years, and possibly the third, New Zealand per capita was the most generous country in the world.
And the country just stopped.
Oh, they did. They completely stopped. What was interesting, the other thing which I think was incredible, suddenly kids were aware there were other kids who were less fortunate than themselves. And this spurred them on to do their penny trails and all sorts of things at school. And on the night when they came in, some of them would come in with perhaps $100. Or some would come in with $10 or $5 because they'd had a lemonade stand outside their place. But they were all very conscious of why they were doing it and what the money was for. And that was a great breeding ground, I think. The other thing about telethon is when it started, there was no money involved in any way. Don Hutchings arranged for all the visiting talent from America. Again, no money, but they had a great holiday out here and they were really, really looked after. The TV facilities were made available, catering. There was no money. It didn't cost anything. So all the money went to the cause, and that was great.
And you'd get the big stars out here from the UK, from Britain, from Australia. Yeah. Huge acts.
Yeah, well, Don Hutchings had some great contacts and pulled on those. And, I mean, people that came out were absolutely amazing. I'm trying to think of her name. Oh, okay. She was a tall English woman. But they were all quite astounded. I mean, they'd had telethons in their own country, but they'd never seen anything like they saw when they were here, how everyone got involved. And they were very moved by the charity and the collecting.
So how was it then that from all of this, you came to be doing a kids show on a private radio station in Auckland in 1977?
Put it very simply, and we're going to jump back here a few years. My sister married a few years before that. That was fine, and she had 1, 2, 3 lovely girls. And suddenly I thought, hey, the programs on ZB and that, they never change. They're very predictable. And look, we're now in the age of Star Wars, and there should be an alternate. And that was the genesis of the idea, which I worked on for a while, and spoke to Radio I, Chris Butcher at the time, and yeah, he came on board. That was good. So we did our first show from the Little Rabbit Warren, as was known, up in Newton Road.
Oh, yeah.
and that was the start of Small World. But there was a criteria. Basically, it was, if it wasn't something I thought was good enough for my nieces to hear, I wouldn't play it. In other words, that was the only editing, if you like, I made. In other words, I wasn't going to put on anything that was had language or anything like that, you know, so long as it was entertaining and I thought they'd enjoy it. And that was really the only edit criteria I put on it.
It was a brave thing to do because, as you said, 1ZB had been doing this for such a long time. And in Auckland, it was Les Andrews at that time, and he just seemed to be eternal. He'd done it forever. So you must have had to have a real careful think about what precisely you were going to offer that was different. And why would kids change? You know, because kids are creatures of habit, and their families set the radio on. So it was a big, bold move on your part.
Yeah, I do that sometimes. No, and so Star Wars, I guess, was the motivator, you know. And along with Star Wars, there was a whole raft of other wonderful kid stories that very rarely got played. I mean, there's a classic, what a classic would be perhaps the Snow Goose, which may get an airing very occasionally. It was a great story. There were a whole lot of things that I wanted to put in there. I had some ideas, and there was a bit of idiocy, which I like to work with. I often flew by the seat of my pants. I perhaps knew what I was going to play next, and then thought, oh, and I'd fiddle around and drop something in. But it sort of evolved. It evolved very quickly. There was another criteria which did come into it. It was a kids' program, but because mum and dad and maybe the grandparents were listening, there had to be little elements in that they found enjoyable, so that it was a total family show.
And that was one of the unique things. You would play songs that weren't necessarily children's songs. They were family-friendly songs, but little sort of novelty things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the things I love to play, and it wasn't PC. It wouldn't be PC now, but I've never been PC and never will be. I loved Puha and Pākehā, Rod Derritt. It was a fun song. I had contacts in America. I had been to America, yeah. And I'd found some other stuff, which I brought back. And I dug and found, I mean, was a lot of beautiful stories. And what was beautiful about them was they were wonderful stories. There was a moral in there, if you wish to take it on board. But they were produced by CBS and the big studios in America and England. They had big bands. Billy May would do the backing. Loretta Young, great big names, would narrate the stories. And that was part of the secret of it, you know. So we featured a lot of that. And of course, there was a live request. It had to be controlled so that kids could phone in, have you got so-and-so? Oh, yeah, play that in a few minutes. And I introduced interesting elements, I thought. I mean, we had things like the dressing gown club. And this was very early in the show, might have been perhaps the first hour, just for the kids in their dressing gowns. They could write in, they could ring in, say hello, and I could perhaps play a record or something for them. And that dressing gown club actually developed into a fashion parade, because they would write in and I'd say, oh, what are you wearing? So, you know, what are you wearing, Jonathan? And this, that, and the other, you know. And I just make notes. And then I went home, and I had a studio at home, and I did a It was a typical fashion parade voice. And here we have you. And I put it all together. It was only about 2.5 minutes, but it really went down well. I mean, there were things like, and here's Jonathan in his lovely blue candlewick dressing gown, and he's wearing his new striking red slippers. They're called striking red slippers because when he's naughty, his mother strikes with them. And next we have so-and-so. So I didn't care. It was just fun. And this is what they liked.
Yes, I think that was one of the things that made it stand out, that you got the stories you'd grown up with or as a child you were still interested in hearing, but you also got this engagement, this interactivity, all of this new thing.
Yeah, just it reminded me. The other thing I did inject, and they weren't on ZB or any other kids' programs, nursery rhymes and those funny stories that parents would hand down. I mean, I had stories my parents read to me, and in fact, I put them on a CD later on. But also nursery rhymes and things like that. I introduced those. They might be little short stings, but you drop them in, and very soon they become a staple part of the thing. Something else occurred to me. Oh yeah, we used a character called Arnold. Now, Arnold was an interesting character because I had just done a pilot for a television show called Arnold the Answer Man. And I'm not going to go into details. It was a very specific type of presentation. It was for kids. And here, kids could ask Arnold the questions, and Arnold would always come up with the answers. And I thought, let's try this. So I tried it. A couple of weeks, didn't work. Really, didn't work. And I thought, why is it not working? So I rested it. Then I said, kids, got some sad news. Dear Arnold, he fell and had a bad accident. And he's been in hospital, but he's come back. But one of the things, he can't remember things. So what I would like you to do, what I'm going to do, is Arnold's going to ask you a question. And I'd like you to write in next week with the answer. So this opened up a whole new world. Kids would, if they didn't know, they'd ask their mother or father, or they'd look in the book and they'd send in the answers. So by turning it around, it suddenly worked.
And the name Small World, was that just a natural thing? Did you have other names in mind?
Actually, no, I think that came from my sister because she had a Small World disc. The kids loved it. So that was sort of the name. That's how it happened, you know.
Space Coordinates was one of my favorites.
Oh,
this was
yes.
like you brought the game of battleships to radio.
The phone would go absolutely mad. Yes, battleships. So in Space Coordinates, I had a square in front of me. The kids had a square, and I'd have letters along the top and numbers, and they had to try and sink the ship, and they'd come in with A5, play a song, or they might say B6. Bang, they've hit different sound. Whoa, you know, so we're moving through. But eventually, I had to have two Space Coordinates, one for the kids and one for Mum and Dad, because Mum and Dad just loved doing this, you know. So that's and that really blossomed, you know. It had its own slight little introduction, musical sound effects. The instant that went out, the phone lines went, whoa, bright. They lit.
And it was rapid fire. I mean, you would just rattle through those callers. And yeah. I think Radio I in those days only had 2 lines, if I remember correctly. So you would be talking on line 1. By the time you'd gone to line 2 and was talking to the next person, line 1 would already be ringing. I mean, you did not have any issue at all with keeping that momentum going.
I think no, we had more. I think we had more because they used it for talkback. The other thing that happened was we worked in delay because it was talkback, and this went on for a while, and then I suddenly realized I never had any problems with language of kids or anything, so we went out of delay, and that was good. But there were a few other things which are interesting spin-offs. I was made aware, in fact I'd been to visit the Wilson home on the shore for handicapped kids, and met the kids, and they had wheelchairs, and they were talking about it. And they wanted to get an electric chair for someone. And I said, yeah, all right. So a couple of weeks later, I did a program for the whole tour. It was a 2-hour show. And I said what we were raising money for. And in 2 hours, we raised $1,000. Now, that figure's important because I think the chairs at that stage were $2,000, and it was matched by the government. But the spin-off was the money kept coming in. So we did, in fact, raise $3,000 that day, which meant 3 kids at Wilson Home got the new wheelchairs. And that was great, really was. In fact, I think we did when we presented them, we did the show from there. You could do that in those days. Take all the technically, not with a cell phone, but if I did an outdoor show, we had a lovely guy called Graham Dick, nicknamed Pastry, and he would know, and he would go out sometime the week before and check the signal was okay from wherever the location was to Mount Eden and eventually back to here. So there was never any problem. And we did have a travelling desk with a couple of CDs, turntables, and tape decks, which were used. So I enjoyed doing OBs. That was fun. You met all sorts of people. We did one down at Princess Wharf one day when a new liner was in.
And your diligence was such that you even did one from your hospital bed.
Oh, yes. I read there. I had to go into hospital for minor surgery, shall we say. And it necessitated me being in there a couple of Sundays. So I said, Graham, he said, no, what we'll do, I'll bring the desk here, we'll put a thing up on top of Mount Eden. So did 2 shows from my hospital bed in Mount Eden, which was really good, real fun. Another thing that happened, and this was the year of the child, this is not CoroCare, it's Air New Zealand Cabin Services. They decided they would like to raise money and take however many kids it was to Disneyland and a trip to America. And that was a big ask. And they had a tremendous fundraising program. And I got involved with it. And I said, look, let's do a Sunday. We'll turn a whole Sunday over. So we had Air New Zealand Cabin Services crew answering the phones. And we raised a good amount, I can't remember what it was, that went to the fund. And eventually they raised sufficient funds to charter the plane, I think it was DC-8, to America and make all the arrangements. And they opened it up to the blind, the crippled children. There were 5 groups. And they said to these 5 groups, okay, you've got this many seats. You decide who goes. And that was a wonderful experience. I actually got to go along, not because I was been involved in fundraising, but they asked me, would I like to go? And I said yes, because I was going to report back live to Radio I. And also, subsequently, it went to the Radio New Zealand network, the national network. And so when we were at California Highway Patrol, which was CHIPS, as the kids had said it on those days, I had a rather biggish mobile cell phone unit that I could connect, and it would take me back to the studio, and they could record it there.
One of the innovations you also introduced that I thought was very cool was you did a thing for a while called Small World News, where you encouraged kids to be journalist reporters, and report on things that were going on in their communities. And that was great, particularly for kids like me who were really genuinely interested in doing radio.
That was another thing. I forgot. There was a wonderful announcer called Jeff Sinclair at Radio I, and he introduced me to this young kid called Jonathan Mosen, who would come in and do it. And I said, oh, yeah. Anyhow, he sort of began to hang on. Not that I objected, but that was how I first met Jonathan Mosen.
Yes, I remember being in the studio with you a few times on a Sunday morning.
It was great for me.
Well, it was great for me. I would always enjoy going in there. Was there ever a moment you can look back on where, I presume you started this, you thought, I wonder if this is going to take off, is it going to work? Was there a moment when you suddenly realised we have a bit of a hit on our hands here?
Well, we had 50,000 listeners, and all was going... You mentioned me being in hospital, yes. But this was in 79, 2 years later. And I had a visitor who was on the board. It was also a very good friend of mine. He came to see how it was. And then suddenly he said, we had a format change at the station, and next Sunday will be the last program for Small World. Couldn't have picked a worse time. I was recovering, you know, how you feel, and suddenly my world was turned upside down. I was gutted. So the program ended because they were going to a format called Beautiful Music. You know, so much.
So it was basically elevator music, wasn't it?
Yeah. So despite 50,000 listening audience, they dumped it. And there was a little hiatus, and I'm not certain. I think I had the call from Gordon Dryden, who was Radio Pacific at that stage. And very soon, Small World was on Radio Pacific, but not for 2 hours, for 3 hours this time. And we had a long run there, out in the studios at South Auckland.
Did you keep them? Did people come from Radio I to Radio Pacific to keep listening to Small World?
Oh yes, it didn't take long. It didn't take long. You know, I mean, Gordon Dryden was the expert in marketing, so yeah, everyone knew about it. And of course, I think John Berry at the time wrote the station change, so everyone knew.
And of course, Jeff Sinclair, I think he had gone slightly before you, hadn't he? Jeff went to Radio Pacific at some point about the same time, so I was in there a lot too.
Yeah, it would have come after. Yeah, no, because I'm not certain what they did with Talkback. If they changed format to Beautiful Music, they may have wiped the Talkback. I don't know. Not interested really now.
The Mini People. That was a talk part of the show, which would have gone well on Radio Pacific, where you actually got kids to talk about things that were of interest or concern to them.
That's what I was saying. I never had a problem with kids, so we didn't work in delay. There was no limits. You know, the kids could have a chat, whatever. You know, I never had to, as I recall, chop anyone. That was probably done in delay, but I never actually had to push the button.
Where else has Small World been? Because as you say, I remember it running on Radio Pacific for quite a long run.
Its total life was just over 19 years, and I'm not sure how long we were last in the Pacific. We may have gone back to Radio I don't know. It was picked up later by Solid Gold, and the format did change. We were held to an hour, but again, it was still very, very popular, you know, and worked. And that, I think that was around about 2006, I think. But the other interesting spin-off of that is when Small World did disappear for a while. But I would walk down the street and people would say, where can I want to get a copy of The Littlest Angel or The Small One, you know. And, of course, these were all on EMI. And at that stage, they had all been deleted from the catalogue. However, I had the vinyls, you know, and this went on and on and on. And I was talking to Eldred Stebbing one day, who is one of the recording pioneers of this country. And he said, why don't you have a talk to EMI? And he gave me the name of the chap. And see if they're interested. So I went along with my lawyer, as one does, who was a musician anyhow. And it was a very, very light-hearted meeting. And it took a bit of convincing, but he said, "Yeah, all right, let's go. We'll go with the disc." And it was called Don Lyndon's Favourites. We called it Volume 1, so we must have known something, but EMI weren't too sure. Well, I think, as I recall, this happened in the November. It hit platinum by the beginning of December. When I was in America, and before I came back, it went to double platinum, which is the equivalent then of selling something like 30,000. And that was actually locked in with EMI. We subsequently, in total, did 8 discs of Don Lyndon's favourite stories. 8 discs of those. We did 2 discs of the kids' songs of the day, Gilly Gilly Ossenpfeffer, Laughing Policeman, all those songs. We did 2 discs. Prior to this, I had recorded 2 discs of my own, in which I told nursery rhymes and fairy stories, if you like, as they were told by me, by my parents. And that was it. And they're all still selling. You know that? They're all still on the EMIs now Universal, but they are still on their current catalogue. And that was pointed out rather unusual for EMI because many local artists, when they record, they have a very short life and the numbers drop from the catalogue. It is still on the catalogue. You can still go to, I know certain shops you can go and they stock the records. If they don't have them, they'll order them and they can send them to you.
And I think that really was a message for a lot of program directors because I seem to recall there was actually quite a gap between iterations of Small World at that time. The program directors were saying, oh, there's no need for this anymore. It's outlived its time. And yet there's all this pent-up demand for the content when it became available.
It was nice because I suddenly was listening to national radio one day to the kids show, and they said, we're going to play whatever the story was, and this is from a CD Don Linden's just released. And of course, the other popular story that really stood out was, what was it called? Spike Milligan.
Bad Jelly the Witch.
Bad Jelly the Witch, yeah. I mean, many people have done it since, but it's nothing. Spike Milligan is the absolute perfect recording of Bad Jelly the Witch.
Yes, it's a perennial favourite.
Perennial. I was looking for that word. You
yeah.
I'll write it down here.
There you go. Write that down.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. What about the process of getting those discs together, particularly with those old stories? Did that come back from your vinyl, or could they find them?
Yeah, because I had the records in my library. I took them to Stebbing Studios, where they reprocessed them, cleaned them up. EMI looked after any clearances. Well, they owned nearly all the tracks, so there was no problem.
What are some of your favourites of all the material that you've played over the years in this genre? What do you like?
Idiot songs. I think my favourite kids song would be, and this is interesting. I'd heard this in the film South Pacific. Some wonderful songs. A song called "You've Got to Be Taught." It's sung by Joe Cable, who's lost his girlfriend and all sorts of things, and he sings "You've Got This, You've Got to Be Taught," and it was really nothing outstanding until I got a disc called Kid Power, and the kids sang it. You've got to be taught. Now, if you listen to that track with kids singing, it takes on a totally different meaning. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. And the way the kids sang it really stood out. That would probably be one of my absolute favourites. Buckingham Palace, I love. Oh, Pooh Parker, as I said. Johnny Stanley's, it's in the book. Loved that. Played that a lot. Played a lot of Stan Freberg on the show. Alan Sherman's Hello Mother, Hello Father. And, of course, stories. Well, there are so many stories. I mean, The Snow Goose, The Happy Prince, Johnny Appleseed, a lovely story. Great. Oh, Marlo Thomas's Ladies First. That was a great story. But I think one of the really top stories was Danny Kaye's The Little Fiddle. Love that story. Love that story. I mean, it just goes on. Sometimes I'll have a day and I think, let's have some kid stuff. So I've got it all loaded on a track. I just play it. And I just love it.
What's funny is that I've been talking to people over morning tea about what we've been working on, and people will just mention stories that they remember listening to on a Sunday morning. And then what inevitably happens is that people start quoting their favourite line from that story. So someone will mention Molly Whoppy, and all of a sudden the whole tea, and he ran and she ran and the whole tea room is doing it. It's a remarkable thing, really, particularly since in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, those stories were old even then, and yet they're timeless, aren't they? They don't really date.
You know what happened? Yeah, Sparky's Magic Piano was a popular one. You know what happened to Sparky, don't you?
What happened to Sparky?
he grew up and became Liberace. Anyhow.
Oh, I'm glad he got his piano sorted.
Yeah. See, I mean, Roger Moore did Aladdin, and Lionel Barrymore, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. Just so many great stories. An interesting spin-off of the CDs, and I found this out later, that they put the CD on for the kids to go to bed to, but the parents suddenly got into telling the kids bedtime stories. Instead of perhaps playing the record, would you like Mummy or Daddy to tell you this story? And that would happen. And that was a wonderful spin-off. Do you want me? I'll tell you a little story in closing, because it's probably closed. As I said, I had a real yearning for the radio. And one of the things I really wanted as a kid was my own crystal set, you see. And I was probably about 6, I think. And Christmas morning, woke up early, found a crystal set there, headphones, put the headphones on. Also, Father Christmas, for some reason, left me a boater hat, put the boater hat on. Mum and Dad walked into the bedroom soon after, burst out laughing. Because what I didn't know, me with my headphones, boater hat on, I had suddenly got mumps, and my face was so big.
Oh, no. For Christmas, too.
I know, right on Christmas.
Right on Christmas. Do you think good kids' material is still being made? Is there good audio stuff for kids out there now?
You have to look for it. There is, I mean, I found stuff in America I'd never heard of. I mean, a crazy song like Abba Dabba Scooby Dooby. Oh, it's a very compelling song. There's a whole lot of stuff there. And there was one station in particular who plays a lot of kids' stuff, and they do introduce some new stories. But sometimes the old ones, I said, big studio, big Billy May Orchestra or whoever it was, big star names telling these stories. In fact, I think it wasn't Phyllis Diller, it was a couple of these people, as I said, did a retell of Lucy the Cow. Hit me with a name.
Oh, Bad Jelly?
Yeah, Bad Jelly. Made a note. Get your memory back, Don. And it was never the same. So I think there are some stories, but I think they lack moral. They're fun stories, feel-good stories. But all those stories, there is a moral there. Incidentally, other than stories, I played songs that I found. And a classic example would be that You've Got to Be Taught, which is a song, but other fun stuff which they could enjoy, or if they wanted to listen, there was a moral there.
Kind of a fable, isn't it?
Yeah. Then I'm thinking I played a track called Opposition. You can never know the good if you've never known the bad. It was a fun song, but there was something to be learned. You've got to be hungry to appreciate food.
And the reason why we are talking about all this fun stuff, which is, I can talk about this stuff.
Why are we talking about this now?
Is serendipity, because you just happen to be watching the television, and I got a message from one of the team on my call center who said there's this chap called Don Linden who wants to get hold of you, and that was about 6 months ago. So we've been on a bit of a journey with this project.
Yeah, we have, really. And the reason, to tell the dear listener, the reason being, I have amassed a considerable number of stories and songs and kids. In fact, I think it'd be fair to say I probably have one of the best collections in New Zealand. And I've been wondering what to do with it, because, I mean, if it goes to a museum, it'll get buried. If it goes to something like the archives, it's available, but it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. And I didn't want that. So that was the reason I phoned this Mosen chap. And he said yes. So in the intervening period, we've sent a lot of material to John, or Jonathan, and of stories, songs, and all sorts of bits and pieces. And there's more to come, so that in his own way, he can bring some of those songs and stories back.
I tell you what, not only did I say yes, but I Was literally almost in tears. It's like somebody had offered me the crown jewels, and the idea that you would entrust me with this material is really humbling. What you've done is you've been a part of so many people's childhoods in such a positive way, and the idea that we can keep that legacy going. I'm sure that there will be people who will tune in who remember those days, but I'm hoping also that there will be younger people who haven't had a chance to hear this material before, who will love it the same way that I loved it when you played it to me.
See, that was the thing with CDs. They were released at a time when kids had not heard these before. So we targeted mainly the grandparents, with the nostalgia aspect, and that's how they grew. And what I did was, I mean, they were available in shops, but I also established my own website, and they were available to buy off the website. And I mean, I'm not talking New Zealand, Australia. I sent to China, I sent to Europe, certainly the UK, all over the place, you know.
So I am going to do a Small World show on Mushroom Escape, which is the old-time radio and comedy channel, so it kind of fits right in there for an hour every Sunday. What's the secret to a good Small World show in terms of the mix of what you play? Did you have a feel for what proportion of it should be stories, how much should be songs? Is there a magic formula there?
I flew by the seat of my pants, young man.
Yeah. That's all right then.
Yeah, I mean, I would try to make something. I might say, coming up after the news, we've got such and such story or whatever it was. So you play you can play other stuff. So I often traded stuff, but sometimes I'd be listening and I think, oh, this would go good on the end. So I might grab a sting or a little filler or a song or something and just pop it in on the end.
Well, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I know that a lot of people who are listening who will be aware that this was coming up and want to hear the memories will want me to thank you for your contribution. You made a lot of people happy, and there are so many great memories, and thank you for entrusting this material to me. I promise you will look after it.
I've just had a note. My lawyer was sitting he's here for morning tea, but he said, and I think I know the answer, he said, are there any royalties we're going to get from this? and I shook my head. Jonathan, I should be listening, and thank you very much for taking over the Small World Library.
Thank you for the honour, and it's great to talk to you today. And if you would like to hear Small World, you can hear it on Mushroom Escape. To find out what's on Mushroom Escape in your time zone, you can go to mushroomfm.com/escape. That's mushroomfm.com/escape. If you'd like to tune in, you can hear Mushroom Escape almost everywhere that you hear internet radio stations. Ask your Amazon Echo, your Google device, or Siri to play Mushroom Escape. You can also find it on Sonos and in all of the radio apps, and on the website at mushroomfm.com/escape. And be sure to tell your friends, your family, and most importantly, the little people in your life, Small World is back. And indeed it's back in just under 8 hours from now. Mushroom FM, we have got the Bonnie Bulletin coming up in a moment. Oh, that's exciting. We'll talk about her radio memories and a few other big pieces of news. At 5 o'clock, we finish all this malarkey, and then we hand over to Steve Cutway. We cut way over to Canada for the early years. At 7, it's Dan Sweeney's One Hit Wonders. Snow White FM is in at 8, and Gary G with a little bit of this and a little bit of that at 11.
Mushroom FM.
There's a funny fungus among us, but you caught it from the fun guys. Maybe so, but nobody can deny it's a pretty funny fungus.
Mushroom FM. Jonathan Mosen. Mosen at Large Podcast.
Should you, I'm just trying to do Yoda, should you wish to make, email me you can. I better not Yoda the email address, though. That could be very confusing. mushroomfm.com at Jonathan. Jonathan at mushroomfm.com is my email address. That's JONATHAN at mushroomfm.com. You can attach an audio clip to that email or just write it down if you like. You can also tweet in with the Mushroom FM hashtag. You can do what Randy has done and send a message via the YouTube. You can also send a message via the Facebook. And did I give the listener line number? I don't think I did. 86460-MOSEN is that number. 864-606-6736. That sweet, sweet music heralds another edition of the Bonnie Bulletin with the one, the only, Bonnie Mosen.
Hi, guys.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I am very well, and
That's good.
I wonder whether you have any radio memories.
Yeah. I mean, like most people, radio was like a huge part of my life. I don't remember any necessarily any children's program being on the radio. We had most, the Saturday morning cartoons and the after school specials and things like that. So I don't have any real memory of children's programming on radio. There may have been some, but I wasn't aware of them. Mostly listened to the local Atlanta stations, and my mom would always have the radio on in the morning, when we were having breakfast, and it was always WQXI, which was a big station in Atlanta, and they always had these. That was a time when things weren't syndicated, so you had morning personalities that you really got to. You couldn't wait for them to come on because they had little funny skits or characters that would show up on the show, and but it was mainstream with just regular, the music of the day. So WQXI, and then Z93, and then when we moved to Tennessee, it was Coyote McLeod was the morning person. So it was Gary McGee, and he had someone named Willis the Guard that was kind of like I think he did the weather or something, and then there was the Birthday Monster, and the Birthday Monster, they had a very bad record that was sort of like really slowed down that would play Happy Birthday, and the Birthday Monster would wish people happy birthday. And then Steve McCoy had some people that would pop in. There was Peachy Pat Pickens, and they were just, characters that would do entertainment reports, and I think he did the voices of them, or a lot of the other people did the voices. And then we had Coyote McLeod when we moved to Nashville. So.
Were you one of those people who would get your radio out and listen for distant stations?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I remember picking up Nashville, WLAC. Chicago would often come in. What is it? What's the big one? WLS? No. What is the big one?
WLS.
Yeah, WLS.
Yeah.
KMOX out of St. Louis, is it?
I don't know that one. I find the alphabet soup of call letters in the United States quite hard to remember, but I do remember. WLS has had some fantastic jingle packages over the years.
Mm-hmm. I do remember I got my grandmother, after she died, I got her radio, and it was it wasn't battery operated, you just plugged it in. I don't even know what kind it was, but it had a great range on it. And I remember picking up the North American service of Radio Moscow one time in the 70s and not quite understanding why I was picking up the Soviet Union. And that was before I got into shortwave. But I was like, why am I picking up the Soviet Union on my radio?
Magic radio.
Yeah. And I thought it was some sort of like espionage thing or something.
Oh dear, yes, because of course the anti-Soviet stuff is pretty heavily drilled in.
Oh yeah, from a young age, yeah.
Yes,
so.
Yes. Oh, great radio days, radio memories, and it's really interesting how radio is quite different in North America from the way it was in Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, where there was still quite a lot of entertainment, drama, comedy, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that had all gone off the radio in favour of the television, hadn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Because a lot of the soap operas started out on radio and then went over to TV. So.
Yes, a lot of those shows like Gunsmoke and Dragnets. We were talking about Lucille Ball the other day.
Yeah.
And her first show was radio, and then she moved over to television. Yeah.
So, yeah, and then some of the soap operas, like I think, what was the one? All My Children, I think, was on the radio for a long time. Maybe. There was a few of them that worked.
Almus Brooks, I think, was on TV eventually, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Make Room for Daddy. Yeah.
Did Jack Benny go to
Father
television?
Knows Best. Yeah, I think he did. Yeah, Jack Benny. There was the Jack Benny show. And then, of course, Gracie and George Byrne went over to television. So television was a really strong medium from early, the 30s. So,
I'm not sure if it was quite that early, was it?
Was it? Was it 1939? Was that when it?
Yeah, maybe about then, yeah. 1939 or 1940. We just read on the Today in History segment on the Mosen explosion during the week on Mushroom FM about the first nationally, officially licensed TV station.
I know my dad's family was one of the first to get a TV set.
Yes.
In their community, so everyone would come over.
Yes.
All the neighbors would come over and watch the TV set.
That was like it with us when we got TV. TV didn't come to New Zealand until 1960 because we took ages to do that. I know. I mean,
you missed some good stuff. You missed the Lucy show, and
we got them. They just reran it.
Yeah.
They replayed it from years ago. But yes, we were a real regulated backwater back then. These days, we're kind of on the cutting edge of everything with our fibre optics, and it was a very different country. Not necessarily all for the better either, but we had a TV and people used to come over and watch it. It was like this kind of community event that you'd go and watch the TV. And we only had one channel for 15 years. One channel.
Oh, my goodness. We had at least 3.
Yeah. Now, we've got email for the Bunny Bulletin.
Cool.
Yes. This is from Angus McKinnon. And he's very concerned that we haven't talked about Eclipse for a long time.
Well, Eclipse is here, and I can
She can
assure
talk for herself. Oh, sorry. I'm going to get the crosstalk now. Yeah.
Eclipse is always here when I'm doing the Bonnie Bulletin. She's very quiet, so she is down here. She's lying right between us right now, curled up. And so, yes, Eclipse is doing well. So thank you for asking about her. But she always comes down here when I'm doing the Bonnie Bulletin. And sometimes she will squeak her toy, but she hasn't done that lately.
She goes through these phases where it's almost like she rediscovers all over again that the toys squeak, and she goes through this real sort of phase of squeaking like mad, you know, and then she stops. It's funny.
Yeah. So she's doing great, and I hope your dog is doing great too. She's working well, and she's happy, and so Eclipse is here, and Eclipse is doing well.
Now, he also says that he highly recommends Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and he makes the comment that it's a very long audiobook. And Angus, this is one of the reasons why I am totally off audiobooks. In fact, on the Mosen Explosion, during the week on Mushroom FM, did I say that? Right.
Yep.
Pam Quinn was trying to recommend to me the audiobook of Passengers, which is a book about what happens when somebody hacks into self-driving cars. And it's a really good book. And I got through about an hour of the audiobook, and then I thought, this is just taking too long. So I do not read. The only time I read audiobooks is when it's a biography read by the author. And in that case, I kind of like to hear someone telling their own story. Otherwise, I do not use audiobooks. So I read Project Hail Mary very quickly. Bonnie, on the other hand, consumed the audiobook, and it took her forever.
No, because I like to enjoy my books.
What did you think of Project
I
Hail Mary?
thought it was really good.
Yeah.
I would like to see, I don't know if there's going to be a second book, or I'd like to see what happened to Earth. You know, it was really funny. It was his character development is so good.
Yes.
You know, the guy was gosh and holy cow. And
Yeah. And then he found out one particular fact which caused him to let off a massive expletive.
Yeah.
Holy soup, he said.
Yeah. And I like the alien Rocky. I would like to know more about his planet. And in the book, because they talked, the alien that is in the book, Rocky, they talk in musical notes, kind of like whales. And so in the book, it would actually, when he would speak, they would actually play a musical note. Like,
I think if I was doing it, I would have done it through a vocoder. I don't know if they used a vocoder for
maybe.
it.
I can go back and let you hear some of it.
It would have been perfect for that.
I think it was a vocoder.
Yeah.
But I liked him. I was kind of creeped out with, like, he's a spider, because he was a spider-type creature. But he was nice. He was just a nice alien.
Now, to the best of my knowledge, Andy Weir has written 3 books now, hasn't he?
Yes, he wrote The Martian, he wrote Artemis, he wrote Project... He has written another book. I can't remember the name of it. It's a shorter book. I don't know if it's a children's book, but it is much shorter, like 10 minutes long.
Oh, But I've liked them all.
Yeah.
He's a really good author, and he just writes so well. They're all entertaining read, and he's a very gifted guy because in that second book, Artemis, he had to write from the persona of a young woman.
Yeah, which is not easy to do. It's I've only seen one other author that I think can really pull that off, and that's Wally Lamb.
Yeah, I loved it. So Project Hail Mary is the book. The author is Andy Weir. It's a really good read. Really
and he
good.
is an engineer, is that right? Is he a scientist?
I don't know.
Yeah, there is a lot of scientific stuff in Project Hail Mary. But,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, he's great. I like a good bit of sci-fi. And I don't know whether we mentioned the other one that Heidi got us onto called To Sleep in a Sea of Stars.
Oh, yeah.
Who wrote that?
That was Christopher Paganini? Is that his name? Paolini? He does the, what is it, Aragon books.
All right. If you like sci-fi, this is a very, very good book. It's very long. It's
Yes.
much longer than the...
Very long.
the
It's definitely
Project Hail Mary.
what they call a space opera because it's like 34 hours long on audio, but it's really, really good. It has some romance in it and really kind of hoping for... Well, he has started a new series with this, but he's a lot like George R. R. Martin, who takes forever, that's Game of Thrones, to write a book. So, hopefully he will have this book out. And I really hope that she gets to become human again. So we'll see.
Don't spoil
I'm
it.
sorry. Well, I really hope that things work out in the book.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, she's still human.
I disagree with you that they haven't worked out.
Well, they did work out, but
I mean...
I want to see her back with the captain. Oh, sorry.
Right,
Spoiler alert.
Time for you to go now, Bonnie.
Spoiler alert. Sorry.
Now, you also have a pretty big announcement.
I do. I have a new job. I'm still with the company I work for, Blind Low Vision New Zealand, but I will be doing what's called a work ready advisor role. And it is sort of heading up, and we're redoing the way they've been doing employment in the past. So it's starting a new process of getting people. The biggest problem or the biggest issue, and it's a pretty universal one that disabled people face, particularly blind, are being ready for employment. And you could have all the motivation you want, you could have the degree, all that good stuff, but you don't have the technology, or you don't have the social skills, you don't have the orientation and mobility to be ready for it. And that's true for a lot of people. You may have been out of employment for 20 years. You may have never worked because unemployment levels are so high. So it's just working to try to get people ready for employment through a variety of things, either more training services. We're going to be creating like materials and then referring them on to employment agencies here in New Zealand who work with people with disabilities.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah,
you will be brilliant at
yeah,
that.
I'm looking forward to it. I don't have a starting date yet, but it should be sometime within the next couple of weeks, I think. I'm hoping to at least be able to take a few days off to kind of, because it's nice to have a few, when you're transitioning from one thing to another, just having a couple of days to sort of like, ooh, okay, get my mind in this mode now.
I took a whole month off between when I left Ira.
I don't think it's going to be a month, but maybe a few days.
You're interrupting me again.
Sorry.
We went for 2 weeks without the word crosstalk appearing in the transcript, and I fear we're going to get it a lot in this one. I'm deeply upset by this. But as I was trying to say, I can't even remember what I was going to say. I think I said that I was away for a month between Ira and when I started Workbridge, and it was very rejuvenating.
Yeah. Don't think it'll be that long.
Maybe we should say the word over at the end of...
Over, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I also wanted to update people on our washing machine drama, which is basically that there's very little update. So I did file a bug report with Samsung, and they have a very inaccessible process, I have to say. They've got a captcha that you have to fill in. They've got a number of selection boxes from which you have to choose the model number and things of that kind that are not particularly accessible. So with the help of Ira, we got it done. And then they came back and asked me for more information, which I'd already provided. So I guess maybe we didn't get it done as well as I thought we had. And basically we've dillied and dallied for a week, and we've really got nothing to show for it. So I'm starting to just push back a little harder now and say, well, our right of return policy is over. You need to either replace this or fix it and do it pronto. So we feel we're getting a bit of action now.
Yeah, and the washer does work. It just does not work with the app.
Yeah, so we can't tell it the type of wash we want
No.
and that kind of thing.
You have to do it all manually.
Yeah.
Which is not the purpose for paying that kind of money for a washer. So hopefully they can fix it. And I get my second jab today.
Yes, you'll be all vaccinated.
I will be.
Tremendous.
3:39.
I'm still waiting for mine.
Yeah.
And I should also report that I spent some quality time yesterday afternoon. I found myself at a bit of a loose end, and I spent some quality time with the M1 Mac that we bought at Christmas time and that mainly Bonnie has been using. But I do have an account set up, so we log in as our respective selves and have the Mac the way we like it. And I was just in the groove for a bit of technology experimentation yesterday, so I was using Twitterific on the Mac, I was using Leary, I installed Reaper and Osara and configured that and was doing a little bit of audio production on the Mac. I also installed Microsoft Word on the Mac, and I have to say, well, the whole Office suite, in fact, that the Office accessibility has come a long, long way since I last looked, and you can press VO with U, I believe that command is, and you can get into a list of headings in a Word document, but what I haven't been able to work out is how I have it report those heading levels as I arrow through the document, but that's probably just a case of turning on some speaking of formatting, I suspect. So it's certainly come a long, long way, and I was very impressed with the speed. VoiceOver was pretty well behaved. Things like the notification center and other things are new since I last had a serious look. So it's in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
You given up on it?
No. I need to install Microsoft Word at some point.
Yes, we'll get the Office 365 installed. That'll make a difference. So those are the things that we've been up to. Anything else to report?
No, not really. No, the weather's pretty yucky today. It's raining a bit.
We should just call this segment Crosstalk with Jonathan and Bonnie. And then every time we do the crosstalk thing and the transcriber has to write crosstalk, it will be a reminder of what the segment's called.
Huh.
You don't sound impressed?
No.
Oh, all right, we won't call it that then. Yeah. Well, thank you, Bonnie. And of course, we can hear Bonnie on Mushroom FM every weekday at 11 a.m. and p.m. with Studio 70, which I see a lot of people are getting into. So
Cool.
That's good. Yeah. Good luck with your flu vaccine. I mean, your Rona vaccine.
Yeah.
All right then.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Jonathan Mosen at Large Podcast.
On to iOS 15 matters. Will Lomas writes, Hi Jonathan, I too have iOS 15 like you on my iPhone. Do we know, please, if setting focuses will also transition to the Apple Watch? Or, from my experience of it, does the watch still let everything that comes through to phone go to the Apple Watch? When I use a focus, do I just turn off Do Not Disturb to stop it for the day? I tried to set it for my work location, but it just doesn't seem at present to work that well in letting me select the location-based setting, so I set it on a timer. I am looking more in depth into how this works now I have heard your recent podcast. Thanks, Will. I'm running watchOS 8 and I can confirm that Focus is available there. You can set the same focuses that you've set up on your phone on your watch when you have watchOS 8 installed. I'm not going to get into the weeds about any issues that may or may not be in the current beta, because really my purpose in raising this was just to preview what's coming, not to discuss the beta process while it's happening. There are ways to feed back to Apple if you're finding issues there.
Good evening, Jonathan, and all Mosen at Large listeners. I just want to give people a warning about installing iOS 15 beta on an iPhone 8 Plus. Don't do it. Simply don't, because I did it and my 8 Plus went really, really bad. Everything slowed down completely. VoiceOver didn't work properly. I was also told that the touch input, so the screen, was really, really slow, and things just didn't work at all. Or if they did, they were very, very slow. Anyway, so cutting a long story short, the next day, because I had to wait a full day before I could go to a technology place and get my phone restored with iTunes. Yes, if you use iTunes, iTunes will be able to restore your device to the latest publicly available software, which at the time of this recording is 14.6. And so that's what happened, and now everything is working fine. And I also was looking at YouTube videos saying they regretted installing iOS 15 beta.
Thank you, Michael. That's Michael Chopra with a report on his experience with iOS Developer Beta 1. And I want to say a couple of things about this. The first is that I do not intend to get into the weeds of bug reports, as I said when Will got in touch. During this iOS developer beta cycle, there is a way to report those bugs to Apple. And when we're in beta, we do expect bugs. So if you find bugs, you can report them to Apple. But the reason why I played this particular contribution is that it is a cautionary tale. iOS Developer Beta 1 is not even a public beta yet. So if you are installing this, you either have an Apple Developer Beta account or someone has given you the file who shouldn't have given you the file. You've got access to it, and I accept that it's all over the web. It's not that hard to find how to install the Developer Beta. But Developer Beta 1 of anything on any platform can be expected to be rough and ready. The code is at such a point that Apple doesn't even consider it worthy of release to the public yet. This is not a public beta. This is designed for developers who typically have test machines that they can put something on without adverse consequences and do some testing. So I think we need to set different expectations of public betas versus developer betas. And we had this discussion with the Apple Watch last year when, at first, Apple released a developer beta that completely broke voiceover support. And some of us said, yeah, well, developer beta, I guess we just have to suck that up. When they released a public beta with the same thing, with voiceover not working, and Apple knew when they released it that voiceover was not working, that was a bridge too far for me. And so I would say when iOS Public Beta 1 comes out, which will probably be Developer Beta 3, that's my guess, if that build has those issues with the 8 Plus, then I think we should be concerned, because if Apple is supporting a particular device, then it should at least work without those symptoms that you are reporting. But when you're in a developer beta, you're in a whole different ball game. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that if you are going to test at this level, it's a really good idea, if possible, to have another device that you are testing with. It's not your primary device. So if you get experiences like this, you're not going to have a major problem. And I realize that's a bit of an issue for many of us who are on limited incomes, but that's the ideal scenario. That brings me to my third point, which is that if that's not possible, you at least need to know how to go back. If you don't know how to go back, don't do this. You should, before you install a developer beta, or I would suggest any public beta personally, take a full encrypted backup in iTunes of your current good working installation. Back that thing up, and it's really important that encryption is turned on, that you protect your backup with a password, because that will back up data that is not backed up otherwise, such as health data and passwords and things that are really important. So I can't stress that enough. If you get into a pickle after you've upgraded and it's just not doable, you can revert using iTunes. You need to press Shift with spacebar on the button to check for updates, I believe it is. You will get an open file dialog. You will need to have downloaded the current IPSW file of the current shipping official release, and then it will install on your phone. You will be able to revert, and then you can restore from your iTunes backup of that official release. If people are nervous about this or don't have the tech savvy to do it, then don't do it right now. Wait for the public beta at least, and even then accept that it is test software and that it may be a rocky road. Apple isn't short of testers who are willing to give feedback. In fact, I sometimes wonder whether Apple is overly deluged with feedback and that may prohibit it from prioritizing the important things. So if you're doing this, you're really doing it for your own interest. But if you are doing it, please make sure that you are set to do this, that you know the fishhooks And most importantly, you know how to get out of it if things go bad. And incidentally, that is one of the reasons why I started the WatchOS petition, is because while you can do these steps that I just outlined on your iPhone or your iPad, you can't do them in the watch. There's no way to take a local backup of a good watch installation and bring it back again. So it's a one-way trip, and that's why I think Apple has a particular responsibility to make sure they don't break accessibility on public betas of the watch.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
This message is from Tim, who has some news you may well be able to use. Tim, what have you got for us?
My old Canon printer died, and the challenge was, how do I find a new printer that I can actually operate? And when you look for printers nowadays, all of them have those touch screens, and in many cases I couldn't even replace the ink without touching the screen. For my business, because there are a lot of flight-dependent people in this world, I still need a printer. I don't use it that much anymore, but some people still demand that you mail things on paper, or they like you to bring brochures, or you have to print package labels. So I just need a dependable printer. And it was very hard to find something that just prints, but also has some separate ink tanks, right? My logo is blue, so the blue ink will run out much faster than the rest, so I do need separate ink tanks. And at the end, I found one printer that still worked. It is the Canon G1501 printer. It's a printer with refillable ink tanks. It doesn't have a display, and it just has two buttons. You hook it up by USB to your computer or print server, and it just prints. It comes with ink bottles, and filling the ink tanks is a lot easier than I had expected. If you have some dexterity, you can do it. If you have enough sight to see which color is which, you will definitely manage. It's really easy, even though my sight is extremely limited. I manage it quite easily. You just have to know that to the right of the paper tray, you first have the cyan ink, then the magenta ink, and then the yellow ink. So at the very right of the printer, at the outside, that's yellow. And if you know that, and you know which bottle contains which ink, which maybe you can actually discover with something like Envision, I'm not sure, you can refill it. I didn't spill anything. Actually, the size of the bottle is matched to the size of the ink tank, so if the ink tank is empty, you can squeeze the bottle empty without overrunning it. And the cool thing about it is you only need to refill the ink I think the black ink actually lasts you 12,000 pages, they say, so unless you really print a lot, it's just something you do once, and it's a very long while until you actually get the notification that the ink has run out. Just hook it up to your Windows computer, it automatically installs, and you're good to print. So it's a lot easier than all those multifunctionals with their touchscreens. The advantage of a multifunctional is that you have a built-in scanner, of course. Well, I also have a dedicated automatic document feeding scanner, because sometimes I get large volumes of paper that I need to read, so I already have that scanner. Plus, the problem again is with multifunctionals. Sometimes they have good scanners built in, but often you won't be able to operate the scanner without using the touchscreen. But if there are people who have good recommendations for blind-friendly multifunctionals for which you don't have to call a pair of eyeballs, to which I don't have access at home, for me, with my Canon G1501 printer, I'm happy, and again, I can assure you, it's accessible if you have some sight. If you are blind, you have to be extremely careful that you don't put the wrong color of ink in the wrong tank, because then you really have a problem, I think, especially if you mix things. If you are completely blind, you won't be able to visually inspect the remaining ink level, which is a bit of a limitation with this system. You can get around it, and again, if you just ask somebody to refill all the ink tanks for you and then reset the ink counter, then it's okay and you don't need to worry about it for a long time. But yes, that is a limitation.
My name is John Gunn, and I'd like to demonstrate Sirius XM on the iPhone. I'm using SE20, using iOS 14.4.6, and also, that's it. However, this has been working since last summer. Now I'm going to give you a brief demo. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of it, but I just want to point out there are certain things that can be accessed through SiriusXM. Now, is it perfect? No, it's not. But then, again, this is not a perfect world. So sometimes you have to learn to explore the screen a little bit. I have the app brought up, and we're going to explore from the bottom right on what's going on here.
Tab bar underscore settings, tab, 5 of 5.
Obviously settings.
Search, tab, 4 of 5.
Search.
Your recently played items, tab, 3 of 5.
And that's pretty obvious.
Selected, your favorite channels, shows, and episodes,
that's my favorites.
Tab, 2 of 5.
Whoop, that's my favorites because I selected that.
Discover, tab, 1 of 5.
And I'm not really sure what Discover is, but I'm not going to worry about that at this point. So let's see what we have in my favorites here.
Favorites, heading.
I went to the top left of the screen.
Edit, button.
I can edit. I'm not going to worry about that at this point. Again, this is just a brief overview.
Selected, channels, button.
Channels.
Shows, button.
Shows.
Episodes, button.
Episodes.
Channel 6, Dave Huffle, 1970 solo
Channel
hits,
6.
button.
And let's see what's on here.
Selected, channel 6, Dave.
Now I double tap that, 2-finger double tap to stop that. But let's see if now it'll say what it's playing here.
Selected, channel 6, Dave Huffle. Selected, channel 6, Dave Huffle, 1970 solo hits, button. Blue text on a white background.
Oh, that's
possible
solo
text.
hits.
Channel.
So I'm going to go back here.
Minimize, button, possibly, down arrow.
Minimize.
Favorite selected, button, possibly, minimize, button, possibly, minimize, possibly, favorites, heading, edit, button, selected, channels, button, shows, episodes.
And I'm going
button.
from left to right, swiping with one finger.
Selected, channel 6, Dave Huffle, 1970 solo hits, button. Channel 69, Percy Faith, greenback dollar, button. A photo containing a diagram.
I love that diagram. That's cute. Okay, so these are my favorites.
Channel 18, The Beatles, I Am the Walrus, button. A yellow logo on a green
And
background.
that's I Am the Walrus, although I don't think I did this last night or yesterday. Maybe it's the album cut. I'm kidding here. But let's see what's on channel 18.
Selected, channel 18, The Beatles.
And again, I stopped that.
Selected, channel 18, The Beatles, I Am the Walrus, button. A yellow, selected,
No,
channel
I don't
18,
know why
The
it
Beatles,
does
I Am the
that.
Walrus. Minimize,
Let me
button.
minimize this
Minimize,
again.
possibly, down arrow.
Whoops. And what I did is I went to the top left corner to minimize.
Favorite selected, button, previous, button.
And I'm swiping left to right.
Next, button. Chapter 18, dimmed, button. The Beatles channel, button. The Beatles, Don't Pass Me By, The Beatles, Don't Pass Me By,
Okay, now it actually tells me what song is playing.
button. Track position, 12 p.m. 3:59 p.m.
Now these are programs.
Restart show, button.
I'm not going to go through my favorites, but we're going to do a search.
Tab bar underscore settings,
And I'm
tab,
going to
5 of 5.
I'm going from the bottom right, and I'm going to swipe left to search.
Search, tab, 4 of 5.
And I'm going to double tap with one finger.
Selected, search, tab, 4 of 5.
And I'm going to go to the upper left-hand corner of the screen.
Actions available. Search artist, channel, or show, search field.
And I'm going to double tab.
Search field, is editing, search artist, channel, or show, work.
Now, a show that I like a lot from the Beatles channel is Way Beyond Compare. And I'm just going to show you how to search. Let's go to dictate. I'm in the edit field. I'm going to swipe left.
Dictate.
Way Beyond Compare.
Dictate. Inserted Way Beyond Compare.
And I'm going to go to the bottom right.
Search. Way Beyond Compare, search field.
And I'm going to go to the upper left where our search field was.
Way Beyond Compare, search, cancel, button.
I'm going right.
On air. Chapter 18. Way Beyond Compare, Beatles Rarities with Tom Frangener.
That's Frangione, by the way.
Contextual menu, button, possibly. Tomorrow 9 a.m. 9:30 a.m. Shows and episodes.
And that's tomorrow, by the way. And that, by the way, the times are listed because I live in Central Wisconsin, that's Central Daylight Time. So it gives me my times.
May 24th, 2021. Rare tracks for Bob Dylan's birthday. Button. Black text on a gray background.
And
Possible text.
let's just play this for the heck of it. And
dimmed. Image. A black object on a white surface. May 24th, 2021.
Stop the voice here. Okay, now I'm going to double tap with one finger here.
May 24th, 2020.
It's my honor and pleasure to bring you rarities, both old and new, from our favorite band and most Fab Four, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, the Beatles. My name is Tom Frangione, and as always, I'm really looking forward to digging in with you. And this week, maybe even more so than usual, as we salute a great friend and influence on the Beatles and take you on what my brother Jim calls the Bob Ride, as we celebrate Bob Dylan's 80th birthday.
Okay, so again, I double tapped 2 fingers to stop here. We're going to go back to my favorites here.
Tab bar underscore setting. Search. Tab. 4 of 5.
Whoops. Yeah, I'm going to swipe left from the bottom here.
Your recently played items. Your favorite channels. Show. Discover. Tab. 1 of your favorite channels. Shows and episodes.
Okay, let's
tab,
go to
2
favorite channels.
Selected. Your favorite channels. Shows and episodes. Tab. 2 of 5.
And I'm going to go to the upper left again.
Favorites. Heading. Edit. Button. Selected. Channels. Button. Shows. Button. Episodes. Button. Channel 6. Dave Huffle.
Right.
1970 solo hits. Button. Blue text. Channel 69. Percy
right.
Faith. Greenback dollar. Button. A
Let's
photo
go
containing
to
a
channel
diagram.
60. Let's go to channel 69. That's easy listening, which I like a lot of different kind of music here too. So
Selected. Channel 69. Percy.
nice piano work. Now I'm going to use 2 fingers to double tap to stop the playing. And we'll actually see what song this is here.
Selected. Channel 69. Percy Faith. Greenback dollar. Minimize. Button.
Well, it's
Favorite
not
selected.
that, but-
Previous. Button. Next. Button. Chapter 69. Dimmed. Escape. Escape. Button.
That's the escape.
Roger Williams. Galveston. Roger Williams.
That
Galveston.
makes more sense. It didn't sound like Percy Faith and Greenback Dollar. However, what if I want to see, instead of going through all the channels, now this does actually say escape. So let's go to next, or no, previous.
Favorite selected. Previous. Button. Previous. Button.
And
Next. Button.
and I stop that. I'm going to swipe right.
Minimize. Button. Favorite unselected. Previous. Button.
Now, if I wanted to favor this, I could just...
Favorite unselected.
I
Button.
swipe
Possibly.
left.
Star.
I swiped left. And if I can favor this, or if I'm in a channel that I have favorites, I can double tap to... where is it? No, let's
Previous.
see here.
Button.
Let's see.
Favorite unselected. Button. Possibly. Star. Favorite selected. Possibly.
Okay,
Star.
so I favored that, and I'm going to unfavor by, again, double tapping with 1 finger.
Favorite unselected.
There
Possibly.
we go.
Star.
So,
Previous. Button. Next. Button. Chapter 68. Dimmed. Button. Spa. Spa. Button.
that's Spa. That's the actual name of the channel.
Chapter 68. Next. Button. Previous.
But
Button.
let's go to previous ones here.
Previous. Button. Button.
Now I stop that again, doing 2-finger double tap. I'm going to swipe right here.
Minimize. Button. Favorite selected. Button. Previous. Button. Favorite selected. Button. Possibly.
And that is
Star.
one of my favorites, but
Previous. Button. Next. Button. Chapter 67. Dimmed. Button. Real jazz. Classic jazz. Real jazz. Classic jazz. Button.
so that's actually the name of the channel.
Chapter 67. Dimmed. Button.
Well, it says chapter, but it's channel 67.
Real jazz. Classic jazz. Real jazz. Classic jazz. Button.
That's actually the name of the channel, right there.
Clifton Anderson. Until we meet again. Clifton Anderson. Until we meet again.
And that is the name of the song.
Button. Track position. 1 p.m. 2 p.m.
And again, this is recording around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's it's an hour show.
Thank you very much, John, for taking the time to explore that with us, the official Sirius XM app. I'm prompted to comment, as you did, that this is one of the dangers of text-to-speech engines interpreting what's on the screen rather than just reading it. I really wish they would not do this. So they've seen a CH and a number and decided that the CH stands for chapter and it stands for channel. Why not just say CH67 and let our brain do the work? Anyway, thank you so much, John. I appreciate that.
On the web at mushroomfm.com. Mushroom FM.
Recently, Andy Collins wrote into the show to ask questions about mic stands, and Matthew has some comments. So it's Matthew on mic stands, as opposed to Mike on Matthew stands, which would be far less informative. Hello, says Matthew, musician's friend, has a good deal of the things Andy will want. I bought the Musician's Gear low-profile mic stand, and that's meant to sit on your desk and raise up and down to about 1.5 feet. It's about $15. You'll want to get the microphone spring clips that you squeeze at the bottom and insert your microphone into. Yes, they do make the adapter you want, where it screws onto the mic stand with the hole in its center, and then you can attach your 2 microphones in their clips, one on either side. I forgot what that's called, though. It's literally a flat bar with 2 screws and an empty hole in the center. A call to Musician's Friend Gear Advisors will be very helpful, I believe. From other vendors come a nice floor stand, a telescoping mic stand that collapses to about 18 inches and extends about 6 feet. That's made by AirTurn, and they have a boom attachment you can get as well. It's about $70. Farther afield are interesting attachments like one that attaches to the pole of your mic stand and lets you hang a ukulele or thin neck guitar from it. Mainland ukuleles have that for about $12. Then there's an attachment if you're a keyboard player. You put this into the inside of the keyboard stand into the pole, and then you have a microphone attachment bar right next to your keyboard. Musician's Friend, Sweetwater, American Musical, all great companies, some of whom have products the others don't have. I've also had great luck Googling for particular obscure adapters and products, mostly finding what I need. I hope this info helps you find what you will use in your recording projects. That is a brilliant, informative email. Thank you so much, Matthew, for putting it together.
Hi, Jonathan. It's Nolan Crabb in Columbus, Ohio. Such a pleasure to reconnect. You and I first met back in the 90s. I won't belabor too much time with nostalgia tonight. As I write this, it is very late on the evening of June 5. You and I first met back in the 90s, and we had some wonderful discussions because Heidi was really small and Richard was even littler, I think, regarding the immense value of fatherhood and the journey that you were undertaking there. And now, of course, look at both of them all grown up, and we could have some really good in-depth discussions about fatherhood with regard to adult children. That's not why I'm contacting you tonight. I wanted to commend you for a couple of things. First, your kindness in allowing those whose perspective is different from yours to have a voice here. That is the magnificent spirit of the Bill of Rights. And when I look at how dark things are becoming here in the United States, I think of you and think that there really is hope. Not everyone believes that voices should be silenced who disagree with their voice. And so thank you for that. I also want to commend you for your stance on gratitude. Here I go, talking to a self-declared atheist about something in the Book of Mormon, but I suspect you'll probably let it go through. There's a phrase in there where one of the writers encourages his readers to live in thanksgiving daily. I love that phrase. It's a mantra of mine. And although I've spent a lot of my time in my life steeped in unfortunate negativity, unnecessarily so, in the last few years, I've really come to highly value the concept of constant gratitude, even for things that seem adverse and difficult and hard to deal with. You know, I've got a lot of arthritis these days in my hands and knees and elsewhere. And so you do ask yourself, well, wait a minute, what is there to be grateful about this? Well, it has taught me a great deal about stamina. And so there really are reasons, even for adverse circumstances, there really are reasons to find gratitude, even in those, as silly as I'm sure it sounds to most of your listeners. How does this tie in? Well, a few weeks ago on this podcast, you referenced the concept of the More Info button associated with Bluetooth connections. You may remember that in 14.5 specifically, I think. A month or so ago, my wife and I purchased a brand new automobile. It included Apple CarPlay. One of the maddening experiences I had with that was that it absolutely took my iPhone XS Max hostage, and VoiceOver became unusable, and I couldn't hear it unless I pushed buttons, and the buttons are all touch screen centric in that vehicle, and so I was completely emasculated and unable to use anything. I've gotten around that now, found some workarounds, and had to train myself to be grateful for that vehicle and to stop being angry at the fact that I couldn't use parts of it. And as soon as I did those things and deliberately worked at it, I did find solutions, workarounds. You provided one of those. You mentioned the info button on the Bluetooth connections, you'll recall, and I thought, my goodness, I wonder if that CarPlay thing that connects to my Hyundai Kona has a more info button. I'm sure it does, and I wonder what that is going to reveal. So I clicked on it one fine night after listening to you, and I found that I had the choice of accepting, there are multiple types of connections here. One of them was car stereo, which was the default for CarPlay. The other one simply said speaker. That seemed a little ominous. What if I click speaker and I'm no longer able to hear stereophonic sound coming through my automobile? Nevertheless, in the spirit of the bravery of Jonathan Mosen, I thought, what the heck, let's do it. I clicked speaker, and to my great amazement and reinforcing my belief in miracles provided to all of us by one another, if we allow that to happen, as soon as we went out to the car the next time and my phone became connected to the Bluetooth, VoiceOver was no longer held hostage, and the car stereo element worked perfectly. I got great stereo sound, and VoiceOver, as I said, was free from the ironclad clutches of the CarPlay Bluetooth portion of my car. And so I just wanted to write and thank you personally for mentioning that. I know you did so in a rather, sort of offhanded way. It wasn't any big part of the program. There were no ruffles and flourishes, as I recall. But you have no idea the extent of the miracle that you brought to my life as a result of that experience. I have been living in Thanksgiving daily for your advice ever since that day, and will continue to do so. Thanks for all you do for this podcast. It's genuinely a pleasure to reconnect with you. Take care.
Well, the feeling is mutual, Nolan. Good to hear from you, and I certainly remember those discussions. And, of course, people will remember Nolan's name. He was editor of the Braille Forum for quite a while in the 1990s as well. So I'm glad that Bluetooth trick worked such magic for you. And I guess one can say it's kind of like the antithesis of careless talk costs lives. Sometimes you can just pass on a little nugget that makes a big difference. Peter is back from Hungary, and he says, "Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for forwarding the suggestions concerning cryptocurrency wallets for blind users. I tried Exodus for starters, but it is not the one for me. You can handle your cryptocurrencies in it, but you can't buy them. What I'm searching for is something where I could buy cryptocurrencies with Hungarian forint, US dollars, euros, etc., and also manage them. I will try the other one that was mentioned in the podcast." Next subject. I think transcription is useful for those who use English as a second language. We may not get everything perfectly by listening, but when the text is available in a written form, you have limitless time to understand. Learning languages. I don't know any particularly efficient method, but what I risk to state is that learning a new language without reading and writing is nearly impossible. So if you're blind, it is essential to have good Braille skills. And in conclusion, an offer for Mosen at Large listeners. If there is anyone in the audience who is currently learning Hungarian and seeks to have a partner to have some practice with, I'm glad to help the brave guy. Disclaimer, I am not a teacher. I certainly won't be able to lead anyone from the beginner level. My offer is, if somebody already reached a point on which she or he can communicate in written or spoken word in Hungarian, at least on an elementary level, I may come handy for them as a practice tool. Maybe I can draw their attention to some frequent mistakes. They can enrich their vocabulary. We can polish their pronunciation, etc. I can speak English on an intermediate level, as you have experienced in the last months. I also speak French, though my conversation skills are not as good as I would wish in that case. I get on in a not-so-sophisticated level. So I'm standing by and waiting here for Hungarian language fan Mosen at Larges. Let's improve the communication skills of the blind community, said with a smile. My email address is takACS.peter1 at t-online.hu. And I'm not going to put this in the show notes because if I do that, poor Peter will get spammed all over the place. So I'll read it back one more time. TAKACS.peter1 at t-online.hu. And Peter concludes, thanks for putting together the high-quality weekly content. My best wishes for you and your family from Budapest. Thank you very much, Peter. I don't know if I've mentioned this before when you've written in, but my spotty nephew, Anthony, who actually hosts a show on Mushroom FM called Anthony Unleashed, his last name is Horvath. And I understand that Horvath is quite a famous name in Hungary. It's kind of like Smith, I think. There are lots of Horvaths in Hungary. And my brother-in-law's parents were Hungarian. My brother-in-law was actually born in Hungary, and they were able to flee the country in the 1950s. So I do have that Hungarian connection.
Mosen at Large Podcast.
You may recall that quite some time ago, James wrote in with his initial findings on the Oticon More hearing aids. Now he has more on the Oticon More. He writes, "Good morning, Jonathan. Further to my last mention of the Oticon More aids, I had a follow-up visit from my audiologist yesterday. My comment about the aids seeming to pick out the loudest noise rather than focusing on speech seems to have resolved itself. Whether this was as a result of the deep neural network learning of the aids by itself, or whether it was my own central nervous plasticity, I don't know, but fancy it was the latter. I am still certain that these aids are far and away the best I have tried. It just seems as though there is a far more comprehensive soundscape coming into my brain. Without the aids, I have only the slightest awareness of birdsong in the garden, but with the aids, I am stunningly made aware of their presence. When compared to my original Oticon Open aids, they are markedly better. Before getting the Oticon More devices, I tried the Open S, Phonak Paradise, Resound Marie microphone and receiver in ear, and found them wanting. Clearly, all hearing impairments vary, but for anyone setting out on the path of hearing aid selection, I would certainly recommend the Oticon More. Note, anyone trying hearing aids is entitled to at least a month of trial with a guarantee of full refund if not happy. Please research the prerequisites of what a proper assessment and fitting should entail. Cliff Olson has very clear YouTube videos on all of these important aspects. Like you, Jonathan, I am waiting for Oticon to bring out the replaceable battery version of the aids, and my audiologist is quite happy to let me borrow these rechargeable ones, which I have had since February. Thanks, James, for the update. Really encouraged by that, and it sounds like you have a keeper in your audiologist there who's being so flexible. You are tempting me to give them a try when the replaceable battery version does come out, provided, of course, I can continue to use my direct audio input cable, which is an absolute must for me. Now, we are expecting Windows 11, as we've been talking about, to arrive on Thursday, and if somehow Microsoft has done a big hoodwink and that Windows 11 build that's gone out into the wild is fictitious or whatever, then I think there'll be a lot of egg on a lot of faces, including mine, because, as I said, I was holding off talking about Windows 11 because for a long time I didn't believe it was going to happen. It seems like it really is now. So we are trying to get a panel together because I know there will be a lot of interest in Windows 11. So I'm going to try and approach a couple of people. We will produce a recording about 24 hours after the announcement, I think, in this case, so that we can get what information we can about accessibility. We'll publish it right away when it's done in the Mosen at Large podcast feed, and also, of course, for those who don't listen to the podcast feed, and some people prefer to just tune in the way we are now, then we will play that next week on the show as well. But once you hear the announcement that's going to be happening at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on the 24th, if you have any comments, then please do feel free to send them in on that or any other topic we've been talking about or something new as well. Jonathan@mushroomfm.com is the email address. You can also call the listener line, 864-60-MOSEN, 864-606-6736, and oh my goodness! We're about 7 hours away from the relaunch of Small World over on Mushroom Escape, so much nervousness abounds. Really looking forward to you listening to that if you would like to. 6 chances to hear it throughout Sunday, North American time, the first airing being at midnight. And of course, I will be back with you throughout the week on the jolly old Mosen Explosion at 2 a.m. and p.m. every weekday on Mushroom FM. But right now, that music says it's time for me to go and hand over to Steve Cadway if you're listening live on the Saturday with another edition of the early years. Thank you so much for all of your contributions and for listening. I really appreciate it. See you next week.
Mosen